content to cover today. We're going to cover a bunch of fun stuff up front: animations, transitions, transforms, some of the stuff that like is joyful CSS, but stuff that really, like, unless you're a artistic designer, you might never use. But it's really fun to know how to work it. There is some utility in a few of them, especially some of the animation stuff we're going to play with. But I'll try to point out like how I would use those animations to create better user interfaces and stuff that is a little bit more useful to the user. And then at the end of it today, we're going to spend a ton of time working with CSS Grids, so that we'll have really the final component to learning how to lay out and position elements on a website. Okay? As always, the usual rules apply, which is we're going to move pretty quickly. If there's something you want to spend more time on, please raise your hand. So, CSS animations. This is the first thing we're going to cover. Animations in general are a really cool tool to add to your toolbox when you want to make something really cutesy. But it also has a lot of interactivity baked into this that we'll explore together here. Every animation by default is going to have a name, and you're going to have a duration, so how long it runs, and it's going to have keyframes. The keyframes themselves are how we define what activities happen. So if you can imagine it like a movie or a traditional animation where it's like frame 1 is this, frame 2 is this, frame 3 is this, like each individual, like on a film projector, each individual cell. And what CSS does when you combine those keyframes together, it says go between these frames as smoothly as possible. Okay? And the easiest way for me to demonstrate this, we're going to spend a lot of time, especially in this first half of the class, on W3 Schools, because their examples on animations, transitions, transforms are perfect, right? They isolate what you're looking at to just the one thing, and they give you a bunch of examples to play through. So we'll probably look at a bunch of those together, and then if it makes sense when we get to the end of the day, we might try to incorporate some of this into some of the projects we've been playing with, like our portfolio we built yesterday or the activity tracker. Cool. So just like with anything else, we'd start with W3 Schools, right? And the reason we continue to go back to these W3 Schools as an example is that, like, this is going to be the type of behavior you're going to be expected to do on a daily basis in your professional careers, right? So when you're trying to do something, you're not going to memorize every possible combination of JavaScript, HTML, CSS, databases, but you have to be able to research quickly to find the solution online. There's a ton of good resources and tutorials, and so we're going to continue to do this in this course because it's what I do and it's what you will do on the job. Okay, so in the search box, we'll just say CSS animation, right? It's going to take us straight to this page, and then it's going to give you an example of all the different things you can do. So let's just look at this first one, for example, because it's really going to show this off. So the keyframes mechanism here kind of resembles the media query, right? It starts with an @, it says keyframes, and then you're going to put in a name, okay? This ties, the name that you put in here can be anything you want. So I can call this Andrew, right? As long as it ties to what the animation name property is of the div or the element that you're attaching this to, right? So I can come in here and say, if I click run now, nothing is going to happen. There's going to be no change in color. But if I change this to Andrew, this will be, you can see now that this is changing. So whatever name you put in here, we can define as many animations as we want in our style sheet. I can come in here and make another one and say Selena, right? And then change this to, so let's go from red to green. Right? Selena. And when I run this, it's going to go red and green, right? Whatever you pick, right? We can have multiple animations running at the same time. So let's make another div, and we'll say div class Andrew. Right? So the first div is going to get this animation, Selena, and then our special div that we have of ID Andrew, or class Andrew, right, is going to run the Andrew thing. Oh, Control S. So you can see one goes to green and one goes to yellow, just like we'd expect. So this is how, like at a default, this is the basics of setting up an animation. So in this example, we've got two specific animations defined, one with the name Andrew, one with the name Selena, and then one of them goes from this property to this property. So we'll talk about how we can add additional steps. It doesn't just have to be 2 frames. It can be 10, 20. I don't even know if there's an upper limit. I mean, maybe you can define 1,000 if you want to take the time and energy to do it. And then the 2 properties that are important from the perspective of the element that you want to animate is animation name and animation duration, right? Now, duration is an interesting one. Let's take a few seconds to explore it while we're here, right? So by default, when we run this, it spends 4 seconds going from red, which is the default state, to green. But we can change this to 8 seconds, right? Any number of seconds. And you can see this one is changing much more slowly to green because we've defined that longer time. You can also make this much faster, right? We can make this 1 second, and so it's going to happen almost immediately. Okay? So name and duration are very, very important. You're going to include them on the element that you want to animate, and then you're going to define your keyframes and give it a name. The name is unique. Okay? All right, what else can we play with? So here's an example with a bunch of different frames implemented, right? So it's the same kind of thing, right? It's a flashing box. It's still 4 seconds. We have it as example. But we defined 4 steps. Instead of using from and to, we're saying 0% is this, red, then it goes to yellow, and then it goes to blue, and then it goes to green. And it's going to do those steps over 4 seconds because we still have animation duration defined. If we change this to 1 second, right, just like we were doing before, you can see it flashes very rapidly. It's going between each of those frames in a quarter of a second. If we change this to something like 8, right, it's going to very slowly transition, 2 seconds per frame. We can add additional steps in here. As far as I know, there's no upper limit, right? So you have between 0 and 100. We can come in here and say, you know, the 35% is going to have background color teal, right? And so we should see a little, yeah, there's a little flash to teal there in the middle that you noticed, right? We can do this from any number of things, and all we're doing here is any CSS information that we put inside these brackets for each step of the keyframe is going to be updated, right? So we could do something like width 100%. We can do width 125 px, right? Well, let's just make this grow nicely. 150. Right. 175. 200. And 225, right? So you can mix and match any number of CSS declarations that we've been using up to date, and you can see this is growing, right? So one example that you might want to use something like this for would be if you wanted to have a progress bar that went from 0% to 100%. That would be trivially easy to do here, right? You could start with an empty box that has nothing in it, and then inside of it is a div that just slowly grows to 100%. We could do this with percentages as well, right? So we were learning before, let's see, what is this? Width. So rather than doing pixels, we could start it as been like 5 pixels, and then we can slowly increase this over the width of the page, right? So we can do 10%, 20%, 40%, whatever we want, right? And we can have this match up, right? It's kind of jumping around because I didn't set all the fields, but that's one use case here. But it's important to note that at each and every one of these keyframes, however you define them, however many steps you break it up into, you can set whatever CSS property that you want. Okay. The next cool thing, we can have it move around, right? We can use CSS properties that are positional elements, like the top, left, bottom, right, because we set position relative here. We're saying this is going to be positioned by us. We're gonna choose where to position it, and using that same technique that we were just playing with, we can make this go in a circle, right, just like this. And it still is going to follow all the same restrictions of the timing that we applied earlier, right? So we can make this a very slow circle, 8 seconds, right? Slows it down. So it's going to make that entire loop in a much slower amount of time. This would be something, I mean, you could use this very easily for like a progress indicator where you just want it to spin forever. Maybe you wouldn't want to do a square like this, but maybe you'd come in here and say border radius 25 px. That should make it look circular. Let's make it bigger, 50 px. Right. So now you've got a circle that's floating around the screen. Okay. And we're going to play with that next. I think the next property is going to talk about delaying. Yeah, so you can tell it how long to wait with the animation delay property. So when the page loads, maybe you don't want stuff to start moving immediately, and so you use animation delay. Right? You could say when the page loads, when I click run, it's going to wait 2 seconds first. You could do something really clever and creative if you're on a portfolio. Maybe you want to have a little Easter egg where you load the page and you've got a picture of yourself, and then another picture sneaks out behind it after 10 seconds, right? You can put anything you want in this animation delay field. Now, there's another cool technique that you can do here. If we put a negative number, right? So let's put -2 seconds. You notice that by default, when we load this page, it's in this top left position. But by saying, hey, this is -2 seconds, it's going to pretend like this has already been running 2 seconds before we loaded this page. So if I click run right now, you can see that it started from the bottom of the thing, right? So if you want something to happen kind of in the middle, or if you had a really nice loop that was, set to move a character from left to right and right to left, and you wanted it to, like, when the page loads, have it start in the middle of that, that's an option that you have available. So a negative number will start it as if it was already running, and a positive number will delay it completely, right? So if we change this to 10 seconds in our silly example we were using before, this page is going to sit here exactly 10 seconds and then start the animation. Everyone tracking? So we've learned animation name, we've learned how to define the keyframes, we have a duration, and then we have an animation delay. Okay, those are the 3 properties we've learned so far. Yeah, that's showing us the negative numbers. Cool. Now, let's say these animations by default are going to run 1 time. We've seen that. It runs and it stops. We have a thing that is animation iteration count, right? It's kind of a big one, right? So you just probably want to type it into your thing. And any number of loops that you want this to do, you put in here, right? So this example is 3. There's another property that is important to be aware of, or a value. Any number we put in here is how many times it's going to loop. But we can also type infinite, and this will just run forever, right? So this is probably what you're going to do most often. And if we combine this, so this is going to run animation iteration count. Let's see what happens if we combine animation delay, let's say 2 seconds, right? So it delayed, it's running, but it does not pause. It just keeps going. So the delay property only operates on the first run of this thing. And what we were talking about earlier when we said, you might want to have it so that it shows as if the animation has been going. If we put it in a -2 seconds, right, when we load the page, it starts kind of in the middle of its animation and it keeps going, right? So just being aware of how to combine some of these properties together. Okay? Yep, that's infinite. We also have some directional controls, right? So this is the exact same keyframe that we were playing with before, except we have an animation direction that is reverse, right? We have a few options in here. What is it? Let's see. Yeah, we can do alternate, right? So if we had animation iteration count, right? Let's say 4. We can do alternate, so that every time it runs the loop, it's going to go the opposite way, right? So it went forward the first time, now it's going backwards, then it's going to go forward, then it's going to go backwards. Then there's also alternate reverse, so that would be the exact same thing, but it starts with backwards first. Okay. Normal, reverse, alternate reverse. So we've got a few options. If you wanted to make something go from one side of the page to the other, you'd probably use alternate, right? You want it to go from 1 to 0 and then back, right? It's really good for horizontal movements. Like if we didn't have all this left and right stuff. So left. Yeah, let's just make a quick one real quick. All right, so keyframes, horizontal. Right? And we could say 0%, right? Because we can do we don't need to be that complicated. We can say background color red, left 0px. Okay, then we could do 100% background color green, left 300px. Okay. So if I do this, I have to attach it here. So I want to use the horizontal. Right. What happened? What are we missing? It's jumping all over the place. Oh, we need to add an extra thing here, right? So we can either use from and then to. if you're going to put in multiple values like this, you have to have at least 3 steps. Oh, it's just jumping. Why would it just jump like that? That's weird. Let's play with it the other way. Let's see if we can go back and make this work. 100%, and then let's say 50% is background color blue. Oh, I'm missing the colon there. Left 150 px. So let's see if that works more like we want. Except there's a pause there. That's interesting. I wonder why it's pausing. Let's take that out and see if it removes that pause. Yeah, that's much smoother. So be aware when you've got keyframes that do steps like this, there's the possibility that as you're adding more steps, if you haven't smoothly given it, I know what the issue is. Each step is hitting a thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we can see that, right, just like we were talking about, alternate is going to go from one end to the other and back. But if we had the regular, which is normal, right, this is the default, it's going to go to the end, and then it's going to jump and go back, right? So this is how we can create a sense of flow. Okay? All right, next. Well, we did that already. Alternate reverse, good. Okay. So this was what was happening with our steps before, right? We have a few types of easing, and what easing means is it's the algorithm that the browser is going to use to decide what to do as it approaches a step, right? So each of these the default is linear, which means it's going to go at a constant rate of velocity change. So it's going to start and grow up to its maximum speed and then stop. But we have easing options. We can say it's going to slowly, and you can kind of see in these examples, like ease in will start off slow but go up to maximum speed. Ease out will start out at maximum speed and ease into slowing at the end. And then ease in and out does both, right? It starts slow, builds up to maximum speed, and then ends. And these, like, here we can make this even more pronounced by making this like 700, right? So you can see kind of how these different these animation timings work. Linear is the default. That's what the box that we've been moving around in the previous examples, that's been doing linear the entire time. Okay? And it's important to note, just like for note-taking purposes, all of these examples that we're playing with come straight out of the CSS animations page on W3 Schools. So you can just scroll your way down the page and try and experiment with each of these type of mechanisms, right? Fill mode, forwards. Well, we'll retain the styles that are set by the last element. Well, I don't know what this does. I've never used this one. Okay. So it's saying the fill mode is forwards. Let's try the other way, backwards, right? What did it look like the first part? Forwards. So it starts from 0px and then goes to blue. So it's red to blue. If we change this to backwards, red to blue again. I didn't notice any change. Animation fill mode. Let the div element retain the style values from the last keyframe when the animation ends. Oh, I see. So you notice how it's jumping back to the red? That was the original value from that initial keyframe. So when we do forwards, this would let us not have that jerk at the end if we want our animation to stop. We could say stop at the last value instead of stop at the first value. Okay? You guys see the difference between forwards and backwards? Backwards was, I believe, the default, right? So it's going to go and then it's going to hop back to where it was at frame, from. It starts here. Where would you use this? Struggling to think of where you'd want to maybe control it like this. If you're going to use an animation, I think you're probably going to want it to do something all the time, so you're almost always going to have things be looped. Maybe one example would be if you're playing with buttons, which we're gonna talk about transitions a little bit later when we talk about like a hover state and things like that. Maybe you might want to tie in an animation and have it like end at the final state instead of going back to the default. We'll have to just think about that and see. Let's see what happens when we do animation fill mode both. Okay. understand what this is doing. Animation fill mode. We can do forwards, backwards, or both. I think this is probably one of the things that you're just going to want to play with if you're interested in animation, because this might be important, and it might not. All right, cool. Obviously, just like with most other CSS properties, this is showing you an example of how you can combine all those together into a single animation shorthand. Right? We've been doing this with margin. We've been doing this with padding, where you can do like the top right, bottom left, and instead of saying margin top, margin bottom, you can just say margin. If you wanted to combine all of those elements, you could do it in a single line. I think for these kind of complicated things, generally, you probably don't want to do it in shorthand, because it's easier for a future developer. Remember, we're running code for each other to read and know exactly what each of these things is. If you're not using animations all the time, which I think I've used this once just for fun, it's almost always better to just be more explicit and to type out all of the properties that you're using so that there's no confusion, right? Like, is this 5 seconds here? You know, if I was a developer coming on after the scenes, like which one is the delay and which one is the duration? I don't know. I'd have to go look it up. But if it tells me animation duration is 5 seconds, now I know. Okay. So that's animations. It's really cool. You can do a lot of neat things with this, especially on, I see this most often on marketing content where you want things to kind of just move around a bit as you're scrolling down the page, or you want to have like a sense of motion, right? Maybe you're building a website for a ship, or like a cruise line, and you want, like a ship thing in the background to just jiggle a bit. That would be perfect for this kind of thing. Before this existed in CSS, the only way to make things move on a page, really, like the main thing you'd use is we'd make a GIF file, like an image that moves. This lets us do it with CSS elements, and it works on anything, right? We've been playing with boxes. Let's find a box. Let's do this one, right? So this is a div, but this just as easily could have been, image source equals unsplash dot it. What is this? 100. Right. So we're just going to put a simple splash image in here, and instead of operating on a div, we're going to do it on a image. Oh. See? Now you got a picture floating around the screen. Now notice that whatever element, like, we cannot set the background color of the image the way we've done it here because there's no transparency. The image takes up the full blocks. Okay, so you notice that none of the color changes are happening. But if we change the opacity of this image, like if we made it, how do we do this? Set image opacity CSS. Yeah, so we can say opacity 0.5, right? Opacity 0.5, right? So we're going to make it slightly transparent as a background. Yeah, see, the color still doesn't come through. So be aware of whatever element you're animating. Some of the properties, I mentioned that when you're doing these keyframes, you can put any CSS property in here. Some CSS properties don't work on some types of elements, or they don't work correctly in a way that you'd expect. So just be aware of that if you're wanting to do cutesy things. Like even though maybe if we set bigger opacity. 0.2. Let's try that. Yeah, so as soon as the image loads, it doesn't care about any of the background color stuff. It assumes the image knows what it's doing. So even if we make the image kind of transparent, the background is just not coming through. Cool. Animations. Any questions? Anything we can play with this more if you want, or we can keep moving on because some of this stuff will tie into what we're doing next. Go ahead.
Can you transition from one picture to another doing this?
Great question. I don't know. Let's play with it and figure it out. All right. So we've got image. Yeah. So we would probably use the content, right? Because we put it on the image thing, right? So we can do content. Right, because that's one of our CSS tags, and we can do URL unsplash.it. Let's do 150, so we make sure we get a different one, right? And then let's see, right. 151, right. Just to force it to give us a different type of image. 152. Yep, it doesn't transition very smoothly. So I don't think I would personally like that. Maybe what I would do though is if you had two images on top of each other, you might want to like animate making one more opaque. I'll have to think about it. Like, that's the sort of thing, maybe, is the answer. There are definitely easier ways to do it than using this, I think. But it's probably possible. But I'll think about it some more. Good question. Anyone else? No? We talked about the easing and the animation. Okay, transitions. This is another cool one. Let's just assume it's transitions.asp. Yeah, neat. You found their URL. All right. So a transition is kind of doing the same thing, but it's doing it tied to an activity that you're doing. It's not quite as powerful as the keyframe animation that we saw before, where it's just doing stuff on its own. But how this works, and this is a really great example. If I hover my element over this, you can see that it grows, and it sets a the transition it still needs to have a duration. So it's going, in this instance, it says we're operating on the width property, and we're going to increase it by 2 seconds. So we're going to use the transition property, and we're going to say operate on width, and take 2 seconds to do it. So when I hover over this, it's doing this div hover and changing it to 300 pixels. Okay, so we've kind of learned about hover yesterday when we were talking about links. So like hover. We also learned about visited. Right? These are some of the pseudo selectors that we were using before. This is letting us control what happens, right? If we didn't have this transition in here, right? Let me take this one out. All right, so this is the default behavior, and this is kind of how we've been playing with it in the context of links and some of the stuff we were fiddling with yesterday. As soon as I hover over this, it immediately jumps to done. Okay? Transition lets us just apply some gradual smoothing to get there from start to finish. And so the way to use it is transition. You put in the property that you want to change, and then some duration. So we can make this 4 seconds, 4s, and now it's a much slower transition. Now, how would you use this in the real world? I use this pretty often for user interface elements. A great example is like a menu that you want to expand or hide. So 2 seconds is probably a good duration for that type of thing. But let's assume that instead of this being a div, this is a button, right? And we say button, and we'll put we'll have maybe a smiley face, and then click me, right? All right, so we're just putting in a generic button. But let's change this div to operate on our button. Let's change this to say this is our button. When I run this, it's a button now. If I wanted to have it so that I wanted to have a small user interface element that I need people to click on, a great example would maybe be a search bar. Like I could have the button itself expand when I hover over it in a way that makes it easier for people to click on. Trying to think of where you maybe would have seen something like this. I don't know any examples offhand, but in general, right, we can attach a hover element, and transition will let us smooth the distance from one jump to the next. Okay, and we could have done the same thing with so let's say background color is blue. Right. So now you can see that it automatically transitions to blue. Okay. Now let's see, can we put 2 transitions in here on one thing? Let's test this, and we'll say background color, and maybe 2 seconds. Yeah, but it also skipped that other transition. Can we chain multiple transitions together? Let's test. Let's use Google and see if this is a thing. Using multiple transitions on an element. Okay, we would add a comma, right? So there's, yep. So the correct way to do this, rather than my first way, you would put in a comma. So before you get to the semicolon to end the statement, we would say background color. And we could put in 2s, right? So now when we run it, it's going to expand and change to blue. We could probably chain as many as we wanted, right? We could put like height, and let's say we can put in here and say height is 150 px. time in here too. Right. So now you can see it grows as we go. This is pretty much how transitions work. There's not much more to cover on this. Is there any? And then you also have the same timing functions that we had in animation. You have a transition timing function as well. So before we had animation timing function, but also be aware that you can choose linear, and you can see linear, ease in, ease out, and then ease in and out. Okay. And you can also add delays, just like we were doing with animation. So if you want it to happen after a short pause, right, 1 second in this case, right? I don't know if that's super useful, other than maybe allowing for there to be like, I'm moving my mouse around the screen, right? So if you wanted to prevent that kind of trap, you can see I'm kind of glancing over this element without it firing off. But when I am clicking on it, maybe a more realistic time would be like 0.25, right? Something that small would probably be enough to block accidental use if you were doing a hover. And I think maybe there's even a click. Let's see if this works. Background color blue. So if we add a click function here, click. I don't know if there's a click pseudo selector. Yeah, there is. No, it doesn't look like it. So let's take this out. Let's see. Yeah. So hover is the only option you have here. Cool. We will learn how to do the click event handling in JavaScript next week, because that is a super common thing you will do. Yep, and this is just kind of combining all of those things that we learned. Cool. Any questions about transitions? All right. Transforms. This one's really cool and it's super duper weird. Okay. So let's close all these extra tabs and let's go to transforms. Transforms is a way you can manipulate the way, by default, we've been learning that everything is a square, right? Like it's creating a block. Most of the time we're working with blocks. Transforms let us shift as if we were like holding a box and we squished it into a rhombus, right? That's the sort of thing we can do. And some of these examples will show that off, right? All of these started out as just default yellow squares with a width of 150 and a height of 80. But we're applying rotate in this top example. We're saying, skew that off 20 degrees, rotate that 20 degrees. Skew does that same rotation, but compresses it. You can kind of see that it turns it into a rhombus, or it's oblong. It's oblonged. I don't know the right word to use there. And then scale is going to stretch. Right, so this can be super weird. We've been playing with images, and depending on how you put it in there, this can do that same kind of stretching effect with CSS on any element that we put in here, right? So scale 2.5. We could do, but that's scale Y, right? There's also a scale X, right? So you can stretch it out on the X-axis. Y is up and down, and I think there might even be a scale Z, but I have no idea what this is going to do. Yeah, doesn't look like it did anything important. Okay, so rotate, skew, and scale. Those are the three really important ones. But then there's a whole bunch of different ways to play with this, right? I don't think there's super good uses for Matrix 3D is the type of thing you would do in game development, when you want to operate on, you got one set of values going to another set of values, but it's doing matrix multiplication. I can't think of a scenario in which I'd want to do that on an HTML element, but maybe I'm just not creative enough. But all of the rotate, translate, scale, skew, all those options have an X, Y, and a Z. And so you might want to just play around with them and kind of see how it works. There's also, if you notice, sometimes you'll see something like this where it says -ms-transform. It's to support older browsers. And we'll talk about that. We might mention it today if we get to it, where it's like adding functionality that, if you for whatever reason needed to support IE9 in this case, you're going to have to do something special to get that to work, because they, before CSS had this officially added to its, had this added to the CSS language, Microsoft had released their own browser-specific version, which is what the CSS standard was based off of, but the old browser still has the old implementation. And you'll see this, there's often like WebKit-transform, right? That would be the Safari version, and then the other one is, it's like Mozilla, right? Something like that. Moz, right? So sometimes you'll see MS, sometimes you'll see Moz, sometimes you'll see WebKit, and it's basically just saying, this functionality is a part of the language now, but give me, make sure it works in the old version too. Cool. Any questions about transform? This is maybe useful for, if you wanted to add like some kind of banner up at the top of your page, like, I'm sure you've seen things like, here, let's add this here. Image source equals unsplash.it 250. Right. Yeah. So then let's let's make the height 45, and instead of saying hello world, we'll say like new and improved, right? You come in here and say height. Yep. We'll do top. -100 px. Position. Relative. Right. Probably want to go higher. 300. 400. Oh, too far. 250. 275. And then left 75. Right, so if you wanted to add like a little tag, like a tag like this over an image or something, this would maybe be a use for this, and we'd probably want to pick something greater, like 45 degrees instead of 20. Right? I'm sure you've probably seen similar. Let's make this 250. I'm sure you've probably seen this style of thing in print. Like this would be the way to do it, and obviously it's finicky getting it placed in the right spot. But if you just had to add this type of banner all over the place, maybe this would end up being a class that would be attached, and it would be like, I need to do that on the image. Yeah, so maybe it's just a class that goes with this type of element, and so anytime you have an image, if you wanted to have a class, instead of being div class A, it would be like div class updated, or maybe it says like only 5 left in stock, and you just want it to kind of pop over top of an image. That would maybe be where I would use rotate. I don't think I'd ever use skew or scale, but you might find a use for it at some point, and you do that with the transform property. Cool. Any questions on that? No? Shadows. These are super fun. This is some of the fancy things that you can do with the text. Right, we've learned about making things underlined. We've learned about making them italicized or bold. But we have the ability to add shadows and glows and blurs. So let's look at some of these options. You can do it on any element. So you can make divs that are on your page look like they're kind of floating off. And it's probably best to use this sparingly. But being aware that this is one really great way. Like we were working yesterday on our that portfolio where we were putting together. Like we couldn't make that text up top that was our heading, our H1, look good, and so we just had it as like a generic yellow. But I might go through and add a drop shadow on that to make it really stand out from whatever that background is, because it adds a really nice blur effect around the image. So, and this is kind of an example. Right? You can also do this pretty frequently on like some of these examples here. We want to put it on we want to have like a hover element, and you can see there's a very gentle shadow behind this button. And then another great example, which we'd probably want to implement in our portfolios, when we were making those little cards that we were moving around with Flexbox, adding a shadow to the to the top and the right really makes those stand out. And for something that's so important in a portfolio page, or if you're building a marketing or like a sales website where you want to have a shopping cart full of items, this type of effect really makes the individual items itself really stand out in a way that's super powerful. So let's play with some of this stuff. So the first one is text shadow. If we took this out, right, this is what it looks like by default, right, just a regular text. But if we add this in here, it's saying, I think it uses the same directions, right? So it's saying up, right, down, bottom, right? So we can say, maybe you'd want to have this be 1px to make it less crazy. Okay. You can position these, and let's make it something ridiculous, right? 5, 5. Right? You can make that really stand out. But then if you're going to do something like this, it's obviously not readable now, but you'd want to go ahead and change the color of these shadows, which I think we'll probably, yeah, so we do it here. So you can add a color as the third argument here. So now you can see it's still hard to read. I'd maybe want to go like 1px, yeah, something like that. Makes it stand out. It's unique and interesting, but best used sparingly for sure. Right? You can get yourself in a lot of trouble and make things harder to read, by picking bad values here. Like that almost kind of looks like a 3D glasses, old-fashioned 3D effect. Cool. But by combining a few of these together, right? Text shadow, we've added a third element here, right? It's blurring the right. So the default was kind of this, right? Hard images. It's like the font is the same behind the scenes, but as you add this third element here, text shadow, if we add 1px, it's starting to blur behind the scenes. And this can be something ridiculous like 10, right? So now it's super blurry, right? You don't even know that there's actually text behind there. It's just looking, it's kind of like neon lights for under your car or something, right? That would be the third element. Right? And you can combine these pretty interestingly just by playing around with some of these values, right? So maybe you want to have, 4px. Right? So it looks like this first number is how far it is off to the right, and the second number is how far it is up or down, right? So we've made this like negative 2px. It should be above it, right? So you can kind of, design text any type of way you want, right? Because we can still use the font, right? If we used font, family, Arial, right? We can change this to a different type of font, and you can really design pretty interesting text effects, and you can even like create entire logos just by playing with some of these features. Okay, so that's that is so here's an example of what we were talking about before, where you're going to change the color of the font to be something that stands out, right? So when we were working on our website yesterday and we made it yellow because we had a body, or it was on top of that dark image background color. Let's just make this like a 222, right? So this is kind of what we had before, but maybe what we would have is we'd add like a light background so that it stands out on that page, right? I mean, maybe we want to tweak that a bit more so that it's even more pronounced, like 3, right? So now it stands out quite a bit, and we can change this color to be whatever we want, right? So this could be just easily like orange, right? We do all kinds of neat style effects. Any questions on the text shadow stuff? This is one of the things that you text specifically has its own text shadow property, and when we start talking about some of the element shadows, that's a different property altogether, right? And it's got a few cool examples in here. Yeah, cool. Box shadow. So box shadows are going to work kind of similar. So let's do CSS box shadow. But this is going to be 4 elements, right? So all the stuff we learned before was for text, but box shadow is for anything that is going to be a box, which includes things that are in line, right? So an example of this is this, right? We've got these divs that exist on the page, and we're saying, hey, we're going to give a box shadow. It uses the exact same shorthand as the text shadow. So like for example, this black one right here, right? We have box shadow 5px, 10px. It could take a third argument where this is the same as saying, because it's black, we can say it's this. Those are going to be identical. And then I think you can also do the blurring as well, right? So we can come in here, and make it kind of fuzzy. So if you're going to make a realistic looking shadow, you probably aren't going to use squares like this, the default value of 0, like full sharpness, but you will probably want to make this, some amount of blurry so that it looks like it blends into the background, right? You can see just adding a 10px blur here has made this box look like it's actually floating above the page, and you can probably crank this up to 20. Like now it really kind of looks, maybe that's a bit too extreme, right? So a lot of this is subjective, and you're just going to want to play with it to reach a value that you like. We'll do the same thing with the red. Cool. Any questions on box shadow? What else can we play with in here? Yeah, nothing really. Oh, there's a fourth value. There's the spread, right? So if you put in a fourth value in here, right? So by default, it's doing the same size as the element. But if we say, hey, I want this to be 10px, right? It makes it bigger. Can you kind of see? Let's make this bigger so you can see it. Let's make this smaller. Quick. 50%. And then margin left. 5px. Right. So you can see that it kind of goes over the boundaries here. If we made this the default, right? So maybe what we want to do is make this 10. It's important when you're talking about design like this, especially if you're going to start using things like shadows. Aesthetically, as you're thinking through design, it's important to visualize like all of my light is coming from one direction and preserving that shadow structure throughout all your code. It would look very jarring if we had a second box in here. Let's change this to a class. Class, and we'll actually make this example 2. And then we'll come in here and say example 1, example 2. It would be weird to have these shadows behaving differently. So if we made this like -10, -10. Oh, let's add some spacing in here. Yarn. So that looks pretty weird, right? To your eyes, you see this and you're like, that is wrong. So if you're going to use shadows at all, I would strongly encourage you, unless you're doing it just to be silly, or you're doing it for like some kind of artistic reason, make sure you use the same shadow thing from top to bottom, because the same would apply if we had a heading in here, right? Like H2. Let's do H2 text shadow, right? And we'll just copy this one. So now, these two boxes, the top two, because we're using the exact same declaration, it looks like there's a light somewhere up here to the top left that is shining down these elements and casting a shadow exactly the same. But if you started moving these things around, like this looks different from this in a way that just kind of feels wrong. So whatever, like almost always, if I'm going to pick a shadow on something, and we'll probably play with this today, I'm going to spend a lot of time tweaking it on one thing that I like, and then anywhere I'm going to use it on that page, within reason, because you're going to want to use it sparingly, I'm going to copy and paste the exact same thing. And the only thing that might change is the color. So if I had this element here, for example, if I was building this to be like, let's use the same thing so it's not ugly, right? If this box, example 2, was background color medium sea green. Is that color? Yeah. I might make the I might have the shadow itself, the color that we're casting, be some darker version of that, right? So that it kind of plays on the concept of light has reflected off of something, or we're blocking something. But I think in most cases, 88888, right? That was our default gray. If we remember that this is R, the first two is R, G, and then B. what I might do is come in here and just say like, I want to make this AA, right? So it's, you see, I've made it kind of green. It kind of matches the color, but it's still showing as gray. And maybe I'd want to make this even more extreme. So I'd maybe be like EE. See what that looks like. No, that's too much. Let's go the other way. Or 4. Oh, that's purple. Why is it purple? I don't know. That's weird. AA looked pretty good though. So you can see, rather than just having a generic gray, I might want to add some reflection as if this was a colored element that's floating over something. But I'm still gonna use the exact same structure of the direction of what shadows are going. And the caveat to this being like, this is kind of simulating height, right? It's this is saying like, hey, this is hovering off the page a little bit, but we might not have the same height for this, right? We might want to say something like our H2. We still want to preserve the top and the bottom, right? But maybe we want to just bring it in a bit, right? So as long as we preserve the same ratio, I think you can end up with something that still looks pretty good, and it creates a sense of depth on your element. But what we don't want to do is change our ratios so that shadows are moving in different directions. So you can see now this one feels a little bit lower to the ground than this one. Everyone following along? Again, this is like all artistic design stuff. You're free to do whatever you want, but it's important as a developer when you're tasked with, hey, let's make this pop, right? Adding a shadow is one really easy way to make something pop off the page. And when you're choosing to do that, it's important to think of it from the context of like, I'm building something that's going to exist on a computer. I don't want it to intrinsically feel bad. Cool. Yes, Leah.
Would it be possible to like animate the background? Like say like when you hover over it, then or not the background, but the shadow. Like when you
Yes.
hover over it, it like the shadow appears or something.
Yep. And so that's a great example of how we can combine these things we've learned together. So we can do this one of two ways. Either A, we can use the transform mechanism. So right, we have let's do the example 2, right? So dot example 2 hover, right? And we can come in here and use the transition value. So let's say we want to make this just more amazing. All right, so let's say when you hover over it, we want it to like really come out. So 15, 15. Let's see what that does first. Maybe we make this 10, 16. Let's just make it big and see what happens. Okay, and then we would come in here and we would say transition.
You deleted the P for the pixels.
Yep, I did. Thanks. Good catch.
Do you have like insert on?
Nope. Well, maybe I do. No.
It was doing that to me earlier too.
Yeah. Apparently, I don't know. Whatever. It's fixed now. Thank you.
The first 3 too.
Shoot. Yeah. Sure enough. That's annoying. All right. So then we would come in here and transition, and we would say box shadow 2s. Right. So we run this. In theory, you can kind of see that shadow growing. And maybe what we also want to do is, because this does not necessarily look the same way, if we were trying to simulate this, we'd want to come in here and say width, and then 2s, and then maybe height 2s, and then we'll come in here and hover, and we maybe say like width 52%. Let's make this 60%, and then height 60%. Wait, what is the height already? Whatever. We'll just see what this does. All right. That's too much. Let's make this 51%. And maybe yeah. But you can see, you can kind of play with this. Oh, there, that felt pretty good, right? Like it feels like it's coming out a bit, and it's making the shadow get blurrier but bigger. This looks great. I would use something like this all the time. The other way we could have done it is, I mean, we could animate this with keyframes and say, hey, it's going to start here. We could make this kind of pulse up and down if we wanted to. We could come in here and say keyframes, fun box, right? And say, 2. Let's say from, right? And then 2. And we could put in that same sort of thing. So let's say 2. Right. was the default value? Box shadow, we want this. And we want width, 50%. And so we're gonna put this on the top box. And then what is the other thing? Height? We'll take a height altogether because that's not doing anything. And so this is called fun box. We can come up here and say animation name fun box. And we what is some of the other properties we needed to have in here? So yeah, I use this so infrequently I always have to look them up. Animation. Wait. Oh shoot. Animation name. Great. Duration. Oh, duration. We need that too. Where were we? 2 seconds, and then we probably want it to loop, right? So we'd want to come in here and say iteration count, right? That was it. Animation iteration count, and we'll just make it infinite. Right? And we probably want to have what was the one that was direction? Gosh. CSS animations. Let's go back to that page that had all the good stuff. Right? Yeah, because we're looking for the one that tells us the direction. Reverse. So animation direction. We want it to be alternate. Animation direction. Alternate. Right, so if we run this, you can see our box is just gonna. We gave it the green background, but that's fine. You can see it kind of pulses. Right? That's pretty cool. It's a cool effect. So we can use any of the things we've learned to transform. We could also make it so that we could have a rotation in here, right? We can make it jiggle a bit, right? So in this transition, let's go transform 2S, and then when we come in here, we can say transform rotate, and we'll just say 10 degrees, right? Now when I run this, that one's gonna pulse, and when you can see like, ooh, this thing's flying. And it's also cool because the box shadow follows it along, right? So it feels very organic. There's all kinds of weird things you can do by mixing and matching some of this animation stuff. Some of it's not practical, but it's certainly cool. And we haven't had to write any code, right? If I wanted to do this, 10 years ago, I'm writing, 70 lines of JavaScript just to get this same kind of effect. So this is super powerful if you want to do something cutesy like this. Any questions? Great question about asking if we can animate it. Because I don't know how practical any of this is. I don't ever use it, and when I do, you see me, I have to go look it up. But we can combine these things in really interesting ways that make the page cool, right? Maybe when we're building a fitness tracker, you might want to just have a heart, and it beats, right? That might be a part of your logo, right? And so now you have a logo that has a Unicode heart that is beating as if you're doing stuff. And the more frequently you're posting into your fitness tracker per user, maybe the more frequently that heart beats, right? So it starts out at like a 60 beats per second, 60 beats per minute, where it's just like a gentle pulsing. But if you're really active and you're working out every day and you're logging all your events, maybe you get like 30 days in a row. Now it's going boop, 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 right? We can do really cool stuff in a way that's like fun, right? This took literally like 2 minutes to animate these things. Like, it doesn't take a lot of effort to do this, but you can inject a lot of joy into your product for your users, right? That's what I think is cool about this stuff. Like, not super practical all the time, but neat. What else? Anything? Okay, before we jump into variables, because that's going to be really the last thing we talk about before we jump into CSS Grid, I want to spend quite a bit of time on CSS Grid tonight. Let's take a quick break. It's 6:01 right now. Let's come back at 6:15, and we'll hit it hard, because grid stuff is super fun. Cool? All right. See y'all back in a bit. So up until now, we've been using CSS kind of in a more traditional way. We're defining some colors, we're defining some styles. But often what we want to do, especially in terms of like theming, we were talking the other day about dark mode versus light mode if we were building a CSS style sheet. One of the tools that is at our disposal here is variables. And so there is a mechanism. So this is a great example of how we've been learning CSS up till now. We've got a background color set of this color. Everything here looks like this. And if we wanted to change things, we're going to have to go in here and actually change values like AF. Right? If I wanted to change the color blue. But you'll notice that the H2 and the container and all the text color that used to match this other color doesn't match anymore, right? Like we've just broken that style. A modern addition to CSS, and I don't use this often myself because there's other ways to do it, is we can define a pseudo selector, and that is the colon, right? Colon root. And that's just saying, hey, this is going to be applied to the entirety of the document. So whenever you hear the word root, think of like the top level element. All right, so this is pretty similar to, if we had gone in here and defined like the other day when we would do HTML, right? Root is just a pseudo selector that says, I don't care what type of document I'm in, the root is the topmost thing. But inside the root, we have this special property syntax. So instead of giving it like div, right, like we've been doing before, rather than like the properties we've been using before where it's actually things like background color, right? We have this magical mechanism that lets us do 2 dashes and then any word we want. So I could do Australia, right, name, and then I can say medium sea green, right? But now we have this special function that is available to us in the rest of our CSS that is var, and then so it's like this var, and whatever you put in here, dash dash, the name of that variable will be in here. So right now we have this body background color set to blue, and we have that defined a bunch of different places. I can come in here and change this to Australia. Big deal. Right? And I can replace that in every place, and it will update those colors. Right? So now this border here at the bottom is going to be that color. So oftentimes what you'll see, especially in terms of when you're starting to design CSS on actual projects, is that at the very top of your style sheet you're going to have you may have a root pseudo selector like this, and the number of like thematic, you'll have the thematic variables that you're going to want to use over and over again, so that you can change one place and have it reflected in all those elements and all those properties throughout the entire script. I mean, most CSS scripts, like we're using these little simple examples here, are going to be hundreds, if not thousands of lines long, where it's defining how everything looks. And when you're working in a business, oftentimes there's going to be some kind of theme that is applied to the entirety of the page. And it's going to be, things like your logo color, your company's background color, all those specific thematic elements are going to repeat itself throughout your design. And it's far more efficient to change the value in one place than to put it in other places. You can do anything with these variables though, right? Like we were doing, so we have this border bottom 2px. I can say borders, and I can go, 5px, right? So I can come in here and say var borders, right? And so now our border has changed to a larger size. So this is a really efficient way to like define things that you're going to use over and over and over again, but you want to be able to change it in one place. There are other ways to do this, and we might explore that as we go into that. There's like a CSS preprocessor called SAS. There's another one called less that adds variables, and then you compile it as a part of the build process so that it outputs just a regular CSS file. That has been the way I've traditionally worked over the past couple of years, but var and the built-in variables is extremely powerful because it's just there, right? Now, one thing to note, and I'm going to point this out here in this specific use case because this is a great example of what not to do, right? So they have variables that are defined blue and white. Okay. Now the problem with this, and this is going to carry forward when we start learning JavaScript, is that the variable is describing the content, but we have blue here as the example. Let's change this back to blue, right? So this is obviously blue, but if your boss says, "Hey, our new color is actually, red," right? Okay. Now you've got a variable that says blue that has the value of red in it. So when you start thinking about variables, both in CSS and in JavaScript, and we're going to continue to hit on this over and over again because it's stylistic, you want to have it, the variable name itself, be description of why it's that, right? So we were talking about, so rather than saying blue, I would maybe put like theme background, just as a silly example. And then theme background, I don't care if it's blue or red or white or whatever, because it does not like it's not. I have not named my variable in such a way that it's tied to the value. Right? Is everyone kind of following along with that? It's going to become very important, especially as we move into JavaScript. You know, if you've got a variable named username, right, but you shove a password in there, nobody's going to know what that means. So variable names is really important, and it's great now that we're introducing this in CSS. As you start to use this and implement this yourselves, think of names that describe the why instead of names that describe the what. Okay, why instead of what. White is another great example. What if I don't want this to be white? What if we make this, gray? Some off, like this now lies. This has made our code lie to us about what's in there. Everyone following along? That's really all there is to CSS variables. There's more cool things you can do with these, and we'll probably explore that a little bit when we get into the JavaScript portion, because you can actually access variables that are attached to the document object model when we start playing with JavaScript in the browser. But for now, I think the main use of this is just being able to like define a color that you're going to want to use over and over and over again in your CSS, and to put that in a name. Okay. That's variables. Any questions? Root pseudo selector, 2 dashes, and then the name. All right, on to grids. So yesterday we've learned about flexbox. The very first thing we learned was floating. So that was the old school way of positioning divs around a page. We would float it, and then we would put in that property that didn't make a lot of sense, which was clear both, and that's going to say anything that's floated, right? Rather than smushing my content together, I'm going to put an invisible separator and say these floats cannot pass above or below each other, right? And the reason we say both is because you can block it to the left or you can block it to the right. Both says block it in both directions. Float, that was the float method, and float worked for a number of years. Like back in the, if you remember from week 1, back in the early days, the way we would lay stuff out was we'd make a table and we'd shove content in our table. Then we had floats, and that was a better way to design because now we could have elements that kind of can expanded and retracted based on size. They could kind of position themselves around the page. Then we learned about Flexbox yesterday, and Flexbox is really great because we can say, I'm going to have a whole bunch of boxes of content, and I want the browser to spend time figuring out how to position these on the page. Grid is similar to Flexbox in that it preserves that kind of concept of saying, hey, I'm going to tell you what to do, browser, but I want you to figure out how to best implement it. But the big difference between the two is that Flexbox, as we saw, is like one direction, right? So we can either say it's going to be horizontal, which is the default, which is like left to right, or it can be vertical, which is like top to bottom. And it will gracefully expand and contract those areas based on the browser size, but it's one direction. What Grids does is it kind of combines the power of laying things out with tables, where we're going to say, this is on the left, this is on the right, this covers 2 columns, this spans 3 rows. It gives us 2 dimensions of control in a way that is easy to develop against and easy to play with. Okay? So let's, I think W3 Schools has really good examples for this. What we're going to do probably, as you know, the rest of our time today, is we're probably going to start playing with some of the designs that we've been working on up till now. The cool thing about both Grids and Flexbox is that they work really well together, right? So yesterday when we were building a portfolio, we were laying it out in like a kind of a traditional top to bottom type of view. But what we could do is we could lay it out top to bottom using Grids, or we could build a product that uses Grids, but then inside of it, it's got a Flexbox widget that has a list of Netflix titles or a list of product titles, like here's all the socks I sell, right? So you can embed Flexbox inside of Grids and vice versa. So if we had a Flexbox, if for whatever reason we wanted to have Grids, Grids are like letting us have the power of tables inside of block or inline types of elements. So let's CSS Grids. Let's just dive in and look at their examples, because a lot of them are great. So they're going to show off like this is what you can do with Grids, right? So the stuff we were doing before, where we're laying out headers, footers, main sections, a right menu, a left menu, all of that is possible with Grids in a really easy way to play with it, right? So this is the exact same layout, and you can see that it's going to expand and contract nicely, maintaining good positioning in between each of these elements. So let's just kind of look at the CSS and see how it's done. So the HTML for this is extremely simple. It's very similar to what we were doing with Flexbox yesterday. You start off with a parent container, and then inside of that parent container, you're going to just put in a bunch of different block level elements, right? So each one of these, item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4, they're all exactly the same. And in this example, like header, main, menu, right? But what we're going to do up here is we look at grid container first. I don't know what this grid template area is doing. That's pretty cool. Never seen that before. But we set a grid container. We say instead of display block or display inline, we're going to say display grid. That kicks this whole all these shenanigans off with display grid. And it's going to say don't be a block, don't be an inline, be a grid. Grid gap is telling us to have 10 pixels on each individual size. So that's what's keeping this extra spacing in here. We still get the padding, like all the things that are giving this pleasant spacing in here. I mean, if we change this to 20, right, like all these are going to get bigger, right, around the outside, right. So, but the gap is the space in between these elements, right. So if we wanted to make this 20px, right, now we've got extra gaps in between each item. Okay. This is one of the ways to lay this out, right? So we've got each item, and we've used the grid area method and said this grid area is header, this grid area is menu, and this value is completely arbitrary. Similarly to how we were using variables or animations when we were giving animations a name, we can put any word we want in here. So I can say header, I can say heading, right? And this is going to break now because we have a template area defined in here, and I would need to change each of these to heading, 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 heading. Right? You guys following along? So whatever words we put in here, any word we choose, will let us, like, when we're talking about IDs and class names, we probably want to use similar words, right? So if I had a menu or a nav element, right? I use nav instead of menu, so maybe I'd want to make this nav. And I would want to say nav. Oh, perfect. Nav. And each of these strings that is in the grid template areas is kind of showing us we've created a 3x6 grid as if we were building a table, and we're saying any item that has the grid area name that we're using is going to span across those sections. This is one way to do this. But everyone kind of see how this works. So we've got nav obviously is on the second and third rows, and the top row is all headings, and then main, and then right. So we've created this kind of structure just by using the grid template areas concept, so that we can create strings. And I could add an extra one in here, right? So as long as we don't have a thing, anything I put in here in single quotes, I can put like nav, footer, right? If I run this, I'm going to get nothing special. Let's make a, let's say right goes there. Take that out. Did I break it? What did I do? Oh, wait, nav. I was playing with it, now it broke. Let's try menu, footer. Let's see if this works. Didn't do anything. I don't know why it didn't do that. That's weird. But let's take some stuff out and see what happens. Alright, so we can jiggle things around, right? Obviously, we can see that working. I don't know why the other thing wasn't working, but we can play with that in a minute. So that's one way. Another way to do it is by not defining that grid template, right? So we had this one that uses the grid template areas. The other way we can do this is just by literally defining grid template columns. We're saying auto, right? We could also add another one in here, I think. Right? And now it's going to make 4 rows instead, 4 columns instead of 3. So the number of columns that we put in here is going to define how it places those grid items that are in the thing. So you can see that the HTML to set this all up is extremely simple, right? We can put any number of divs in here and everything will work perfectly. But when we want to tell it how to position these elements, we're going to use either grid template columns. We could do the same thing with grid template rows, I believe, right? So now we've got 6 rows. Let's take this out. Let's say there's 2 rows. I don't know why that didn't work. I'm sure it'll tell us later. But it's just showing you that these things exist. So grid column gap is the space between the elements. We can also do grid row gap, 50px, run. And so now we've got extra spacing in between these things. Okay. And then grid gap combines those two values. So if we wanted to have a different row and column, we could do it as two separate values, or we could smush it together and just say everything is 50 pixels. Now, where this is important is that just like with our other responsive design things, we might want to make this something that flexes with the size of our display. So this would be where you'd probably want to use relative units instead of absolute units, or in the cases of gaps like this, you might want to make it always just be a specific absolute unit. Yeah, so this is another way to do this, right? So rather than using that crazy template mechanism that we were doing before, where we said, hey, this is going to be X, Y, and Z, we can come in here and on the individual elements, right? So if this was, let's make this more realistic. So header, right? Right. If we want our header to go across multiple things, we can say, hey, this is going to skip. It's going to start on column 1 and end on column 3. So we're telling it to skip over gaps, right? And we can do the same thing. Let's say this is a footer, animate footer, right? You can come in here and say footer, grid, column, start 1, grid, column, end 4, 3. Right? Let's see what that does. Yeah. So now we've just told it, hey, this is going to have at least this much space. Let's see if we bump this up to 4, what happens. Right? It should go the whole way, right? Yeah. So we've told it to like auto define and put 3 columns in these boxes, but when you have start and end, it's got to go to that plus 1. I don't know why it does that. Let's see if there's an answer here in that column 3. Oh, because it goes to line 4, right? So when we say grid column start, grid column end, we want it to go to the end of line 4. So that'll be the 3rd column plus 1. Okay. That's pretty much it. Let's play with grids a little bit. Let's see if we can. Let's quickly maybe Is there any questions before we move on? I think what we're going to do is probably redo the work we did on the activity tracker and rebuild it with grids. No? All right. Let us jump in. We'll try it a couple different ways too, right? So, I want that back up because I'm definitely going to forget all those things. Okay, opening up, I'm going to open my folder, and we have it as the activity tracker, right? Select folder. So this is what we had before. Let's open up our page, open with live server, so we can start to play with this code, right? So if we look at our index.html, actually let's take out all of our CSS as a good first step, right? So we defined this page to have like a ugly background. We're still not in love with it. We've got a menu, we've got a heading, we've got a main activity area, and then I think we have a footer with a copyright message down here. If I, you see, it's contact us. So we like the HTML. Let's take out all of our design information, and actually let's keep that. Let's make this background color white. Kind of go back to the beginning. So FFF color, we'll make this black. Okay, and we'll leave our link colors. All right. So we have the nav. This is what we were doing before. We were floating the navigation element, then we were floating the main activity tracker area, and then the footer. We were clearing both so that none of those, because we were talking about the clear attribute. If we took this out, right, with the float model. You can see that the footer goes all the way up because these elements have been floated outside of their normal context. So now the footer, which is not floated, says, well, I just belong at the very top. Okay. What clear both gave us was my soda's in the way of my screen. When we had clear both in here, it forces it to say anything that was floated, I'm going to go below that. Okay. And so that's where you can see that here. Let's make. Did we change our font color? Yeah, we need to change this to 000. Okay. Great. So here we are. What we're going to do is we're going to take out all of our structural information that we put that was using the float model. Okay. So now we have everything's from top to bottom kind of lined up on each other. I think our colors for the links are probably terrible. Let's pick something that's like darker. Let's see our links. We'll say, hey, let's make this. All right. So we got our links. This is our menu. Okay. So to use grids, the first thing we're probably going to want to do is put this inside of a container. Let's make this window smaller so that we can see it at the same time. Great. All right. So we have in here, what elements do we have? We have a main. We have a header. We have a main. We probably want to put everything in this page inside of a container. So we're going to do div id equals container. Oh, let's call it grid container just so we can. Okay. And then we're going to take all of these elements that we are going to start to position ourselves up to and including the footer. We're going to make sure they're inside the container. Right. So all I've done is I've taken all the stuff that was at the top level and I've added it into a box. Okay. Let's take out some of this extra stuff so that we don't have pages going on for decades and decades. Okay. Now the very first thing I probably want to do, let's we got a section main, we got a header. So let's just do this just for the sake of like being able to see this. We're going to add so header, section, footer. Right. Let's add a background, a border, 1px solid green. Right. And we're just going to do this just so we can visualize. Right. So everything has a border around it now. Everything is going from top to bottom as like the default flow. Okay, but what we want to do is we've just created this this grid container. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say grid container, and we're going to say display grid. Right, so it's the very first thing we want to do. So it's a grid, but it's still flowing from top to bottom. Everything is default. Okay. The next thing that we need to do is let's try their version first. Grid template areas. I've never used this before, so this will be fun. So we'll say grid template areas, and we'll say header, 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 and then we'll say menu, menu. Let's do menu, main, main, and then we'll do footer, footer, footer. Right? And then we finish it like that. Okay. So we defined. This is what. Oh, that happened automatically. That was neat. How'd that do that? Cool. Okay, but what we have to do now is we have to go and tell our code what belongs in what section. So the first one we know is our header. So our header, we want to define it as header, and we're going to say what was it was grid area? Yeah, grid area. Grid area header. Okay. So if we come into our code now you can see everything that was in a header is spanning 3 columns, and it's taking up the whole width, right? Everything else is still kind of broken because we haven't added their things. But we can come in here now, and what was our menu called? We had it called nav, right? So we can say nav grid area menu, right? And so now should say that, and then we want to probably go and grab our tracker. So we'll say section tracker, and we'll say grid area main, and then we want to grab our footer, which is a footer element, and say grid area footer. Add a little space here so it looks nice. And so that's close to what we want. The footer is at the bottom like we wanted, and it spans both things. The main area is not. It should be to the right of menu. So it should be menu and then two blocks of main. So why is it not working? I don't know. Going to save. So we've got our nav there. Probably because it's inside of a section ID main. So let's just take this out. And take this out. So we're debugging here in real time. Now, if I was building this from scratch, I'd probably lay out my grids first instead of trying to smush it into an existing design, which I think is harming us here. But this is an excellent exercise for figuring out why this isn't working. Yep, so section ID tracker, great. And there we go. That was all that needed to happen. Okay? We can kind of see that we've got a website that will kind of shrink and grow. We've laid it out all perfectly without much fuss, right? But it seems like what our assumption was the container itself is going to operate on the elements inside of the container as if they are all in the same level of indentation, right? So when we're looking at the examples in W3 schools, right, when we look at like the top level container is going to treat the items inside of it as grid. But what we had done that broke things was we had one in here that was like, div class equals something else, right? And then we had a couple of elements that were inside of it, and that broke that rendering. So now we've learned, hey, we probably need to keep this separated. No, I just click save instead of now. So that breaks it there as well, right? Even though we had a menu and main, now they're all smushed inside one because it thinks that this element is a grid container that has a grid area of whatever, undefined. Okay, now what else do we probably want to do here? We probably want to add a grid gap. So we're going to put that in the grid container thing. So we're going to put grid gap. And maybe we want to put in like 10px to see what that looks like. And if we save, did our nav not get a, oh yeah, we did. Let's add this here. And we want to see the border on our nav as well. So now we can see that we've got a beautiful little gap amongst all these different things. So I would take this and I would generally combine this with some of the media queries we were learning about yesterday, right? So if I wanted to say, hey, when we're on a small window, make the menu disappear, right? Because this looks bad. And so maybe, let's see, how would we do this? Let's just look this up. So responsive grid CSS. Here's an example of using it without media queries, right? So I would read a tutorial like this and try to figure out, yep. Okay, so there's an option in here that tells us how to align the items in the grid based on the size of the screen, right? So we could probably try doing that, right? So when we were doing grid template areas, if we were just setting the columns up on their own, we could say, hey, as soon as it goes below 240 pixels, we're going to switch to auto fit. Yeah, cool. Any question? Yeah, I'm showing you a GIF of the example where it's adding extra columns in here. Any questions on grids? What do you want to play with next? Let's maybe take a look at. Okay, we looked at template rows, auto rows. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
So to avoid what just happened when you got the little bug, would it be better to just be really specific every time and create grid containers with IDs and only reference them by ID?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's a good idea if you're like. Remember, we were learning about the difference between IDs and classes. If there's going to be just one of it, use the ID. I almost always will use grids if I'm going to use grids to do my structural layout. So I'm going to lay out the big picture stuff of the page, set up a menu, set up a header, set up a footer, almost exactly like this. And generally when I'm doing this, the choice is I'm either going to do a single column layout like our portfolio was, a 2-column layout where I've got a menu and a main area, or a 3-column layout. Like those are the main things you're going to see. I'm almost always going to want to, because I know I'm going to use these, I'm almost always going to say like this menu is ID of menu. This is an ID of, I think of this one we called it tracker because we know we're building a tracker. We're probably going to want to be able to add content to this later with JavaScript. But you could just as like we have semantic HTML tags as well, like where we have a nav, right? That means this could have just easily also been the other semantic HTML tag menu, right? And so we could have made this menu. I think that from an HTML standpoint, that using the tags itself to be like this is what the menu is going to be in, right? Is cleaner than having a whole bunch of stuff like menu ID equals navigation, right? You can get overly descriptive with this. It's going to come down to preference and style, and if you get to an employer, they might specify something like every top level display element needs to have an ID and a class. I don't know. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. But when I'm building stuff for myself, I'm almost always going to lean on the side of like as an example, I'm going to put this as the menu tag, and I might actually put the ID on the UL, right? And I might be like main menu, right? And the reason I'm going to do that is because when I need to touch it with JavaScript, I'm going to be doing it to add additional menu items. And like tracker is a great example. I probably would not put ID tracker on here. I would probably put, because the thing I'm going to want to talk to with JavaScript is like this add activity text box. But, you know, for this, like, there's no right or wrong answer, and it's going to come down to, like, you know, when we talk about we're writing for other developers, that's what we mean. It's like you're trying to communicate with some other programmer, whether it's you in the future, you tomorrow, or Leah because you're working on a team. So writing in a way that makes it clear what your intentions were, and that even speaks to what we were talking about earlier about like variable naming, right? Like if you want to pick names that make it clear what you're doing so that you can express yourself using code. Good question. Yeah, all right, cool. Let's play with some other grid options. Cool. All right, so we played with that one. What are some other important elements? All right, so we can set the size. Great. So this is one of the things that you might want to do when you've got fixed, like for our menu, for example. In our example, we've got this menu, and it's going to just kind of equally share space with our activity tracker. Okay, but I might want to come in here and use the grid template columns function to tell it, the property here, to say, hey, my menu is always going to be 200 pixels wide, or, you know, we'll probably want to use a relative unit instead of an absolute unit, but for the sake of argument, where was it at? Here. Grid template columns, and we'll say, you know, 200px auto, right? And so what we're saying is we've set up that we've got three column areas in our template here, but we're going to say, hey, the one on the far left is always going to be 200 pixels wide. And so when we come in here and view this page, right, now that no longer gains in size, but the one on the right does, the one that is spanning two columns. And one thing that jumps out that we took out that I hate is in our menu, right? So nav li list style type none. Right? We want to take out those little dots. UL. Oh, we changed it to menu, didn't we? Yep. All right, cool. And then we probably want to say margin 0. Padding. Padding. Or is it on the UL itself? Let's see if this works. Yeah, perfect. Right. So now we have a beautiful little menu where our main content is now growing. Tracking? Yeah, so you can, however many columns you've defined, right, and you define them inside, you know, we could just easily come in here and say header, 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 and then menu, menu, main, footer, footer, footer. Now we've said, hey, this is a 4-column layout, and we're going to say 200 pixels, auto, 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 but maybe we want to make this 200 pixels, right, so that now the menu takes up a ton of space because it's 400 pixels for both of those columns, but the other element can grow and expand, right, and it will only grow and expand as big as it can. So we're going to have to do some crazy stuff to get it to be responsive like the Flexbox and move things around. What did I do here? We do control 1. Wait, what? Alright. Back to where we were. Let's take out this extra stuff. Okay. So, as you can see, it's a little bit more challenging to try and fit an existing design that you've spent time structuring into CSS Grids, but I think there's a lot of value in playing with this, because what I would do if I was actually building this as a product is I'd probably start with a grid and then start adding content to it. The other interesting thing is if we combined what we were learning yesterday, and we could put a Flexbox item in here, and like have a list of products, right? What are we doing here? Did I type something wrong? Oh, we made this 2 instead of 1. Cool. So inside of this, right, we have this as a list of items, right? Activity log. It's all inside this section tracker. So that's one of our grid content sections. I can, we can just as easily, if we had none of this content here, let's say after the, here, let's just comment it out so we don't lose it. So it'll drive me crazy if we do. Okay, so all of that content is gone. But how we would mix and match this now is I can come in here and maybe say like div class equals flex container. And just like we built our portfolio yesterday, let's just go steal our code from it so we don't have to retype it. CBC 12 instructor.github.io. And view page source. Let's pull up our CSS. And we had it, where was it? Flexbox, yeah. So we're going to say container, project, and grid. So we'll even steal the classes and things too in the HTML. So I've just copied that CSS that we worked on last night. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab these elements. I'm going to put them right here inside of our, let's change it. Yeah, perfect. So now when we load this page, we're going to have that same tile mechanism that we had before exists within our CSS grid. So you can mix and match them. They work very well together, right, for all the things we do. I would still urge you to think of grids as like structural design and use Flexbox for like intentional, merging and squishing of content that is built inside there. But it's just another tool for you to be aware of because you can mix and match these things. We could just as easily have had another grid inside of here, right? We could make a brand new element and we can, replicate everything we did structurally, but inside this page. And we could probably even, let's see if we can break this in a way that's interesting. So container, so instead of flex, we'll make this display grid, right? Okay, let me take out here. Let's borrow some of this stuff. Right. Cool. So now we have a. What we haven't done is we haven't gone in and told each of these these classes of project which one of these grid template areas it belongs to. But this is a grid in here now, right? So you can make grids inside of grids inside of grids. Cool. Everyone following along? We do have some interesting activities. I'm going to probably release them as a part of homework tomorrow. But I just wanted to show them off briefly because I think they're really useful at learning some of the ways you can position these elements. So let me see if I can find it here. Yeah. So the first one is Flexbox Froggy, and we probably should have released this last night as a thing. But what it is, it's a little cutesy game, and it's going to kind of introduce you to letting you practice with the thing. So in this one, it says, hey, we're trying to get the frog all the way to the lily pad, and it kind of gives you hints along the way. It's got a whole bunch of levels, and it'll say, using the justify content, yeah, so this example, justify content, flex, end, right? It moves the frog to the right spot. And then it's gonna get progressively harder as it goes through, using some of the properties that you may or may not use, right? So we gotta use both of them. So we'd wanna do justify content, and then maybe center. Let's see if that works. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so that's one of them. The other thing that we're going to introduce is CSS Garden, which is very similar. It's, that's the same type of game, but it's going to start you off at level 1 and say, hey, put in the CSS that will move the water to the right spot, right? You've got a grid here of 5 by 5, and we're going to say grid column start 3, right? This is a really super fun little cutesy, like these two things are really useful because they're going to introduce all the properties that you can use in a way that makes it really easy to visualize how these things are being moved around using grids and using Flexbox. Any questions? Let's see. Are any of these useful to go over in more detail? No. All right. What would we like to do for our remaining hour and a half? Would we like to build a project together, or we would like to go in more depth on CSS Grids, or more depth on the Flexbox? What would you like? Gregory, you have a question?
No, I would like. I would ask, can we do more on the portfolio?
Work on the portfolio a bit more?
Yeah.
Yep. Does everyone else want to do that as well? We can maybe spend 15 minutes just kind of tweaking it, playing with some of the cool little effects and animations that we learned about at the beginning of the day, just to add some spice to it. Right? I think I can think of a couple of areas that would be fun to add some interesting little bits of zing. And then maybe what we do is we kind of start a new project. Maybe go on a break and then come back and think of like what's a web app we might want to develop together. All right, let's do that. All right, so we got our portfolio. Let me pull up that code, which was in here. All right, great. If I pull up the file, we got opens live server. Great. So this is where we're at locally, right? So the first thing that jumps to mind is we spent a lot of time yesterday playing with these little things, but I think there's an opportunity here, especially with our images, to start making it. If it was my portfolio, I'd want to start making things start to stand out. So, okay, we had this placeholder image in here. The very first thing I'm going to do, right, because we have this is Eric Harrison's picture, I'm going to grab a picture of myself off the computer, and we'll say, we're going to make a folder, images. Oh, I have an images folder. Great. I'm just going to drag that picture in here. Right. Cool. Right. And I'm going to come in here and say, // images / images Eric.jpg, right? Cool. Well, that's a big picture. That's too big. I hate it. So what we're gonna do to make that smaller is we're just gonna go in here and say width. Better. All right, cool. Maybe let's make this 150. All right, so I can do this a couple different ways, and what we're showing off here is I'm using the image width attribute to set the width of this image that's being loaded in. We could have also gone into our CSS and edited our image, right? So I could have said width 150 px, right? If I wanted. And what we probably want to do actually is when we start to like make sure this works good on mobile, we're gonna want to make sure, like if we were in a mobile view, right? I probably don't want a picture that big of myself. That seems ridiculous. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But the first thing that really hops to mind is like we've got this little background border that we added ourselves. This one is ripe for like making it have a box shadow, right? So let's try that. So we've got up here. Let us pull this up and we'll do box shadow, and let's just say 5px, 5px, 5px. 0, 0, 0. Just see what it looks like. Right. Okay, that's too sharp. Let's maybe make this 10px. Right. Okay, that looks pretty good. But now the shadow is kind of crossing into this little padding that we gave ourselves on our text here. So I might want to come through actually here and instead of margin right 0.5 rem, maybe we make this like 0.7. Yeah, that's pretty good. 0.8. Yeah, much better. I'm pretty happy with that. And then now I'm not super crazy about this color because it looks kind of yellow. So let's maybe just make this whiter. That's too white. Let's just do maybe come down a bit. Cool. Yeah, I like that. That looks pleasing, right? What else would I want to do, right? I also have this H2 in here that is above it, about Eric, PAC. I'm probably going to want to put some extra margin on all of these, right? So I might actually want to use, because I'm going to want to use the same thing everywhere, let's actually make a root style, or some variables up here, and we're going to say root, and then we're going to say heading, let's say headings, and we're going to make that 5px to begin with, right? And then what we can do is we can come in here and say h1, h2, right? We're just going to say margin, bottom, var headings, right? So now I've added a little bit of margin to the bottom of that. I'm not happy with how much spacing that gives me, so let's maybe bump this up to 10 pixels. Okay, that's much better. Okay, so we just created a variable, and we've used it in a bunch of places everywhere there's heading, but it's also applying on this one, which we probably don't want. Yeah, because it's applying to both of those. So we're going to come in here and say, no, we don't want it there. We want it on our, were those H2s, all those? H2s, yeah. Probably want those, yeah, that's fine. You probably just want it on H2s. So instead of having it on both of those, we'll add it to just this one. Okay, so now we've taken away that stuff. Now, this is another thing that jumps out, right? Like this text right here looks really hard to read. So let's play with that using some of the text shadow stuff that we had. And we will do that right where our heading is. Right? Yep, so we have it here. So first off, I probably don't want it to be yellow. But maybe we make it white to begin with. That's hard to read. But we come in here because let's start playing with text shadow. Text shadow. Let's do the same thing, right? Well, what do we have? 5px, 5px, 10px, 000. Right? Let's see what that looks like. Hey, that alone right there made it look pretty good. Let's maybe make this more pronounced. So let's maybe make this 15, so it's even blurrier. Not crazy about it. Maybe make this 10px. See what this does. No, that's too much. But maybe what we do is we make this, we say, hey, the text shadow is going to be directly on top of the letters, but it's going to be, right? Yeah, that stands out. Let's try a few different, yeah, it looks great on all of these. Maybe not as good on that one. Maybe we just give this a light color, right? Like pick a blue or something. I don't like that on that. Okay, we'll come back to it. That's cool. That's a cool picture. I like that little unsplash background. All right, we got that, but I really like this style, right? So this border here, I think this looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal this. I'm going to put it on all of our portfolio items, right? So we want to probably just have it on project. So let's just see what that does. Now it's not going to work because we have a background. We're on the black background. That looks kind of ugly. So maybe what we would do here is, I know we were kind of doing like an alternating light, dark, but maybe this one needs to be something like medium sea green. All right, let's pick like a, oops. Let's do it on the portfolio itself, background color. Let's still make it dark, but let's add some color into this. Medium seal green. No, that looks awful. But maybe it would look good if we changed our thing to blank. Okay, that looks pretty cool. Yeah, I'm pleased with this. Now we've got a little bit of color in here. And it actually looks really cool with that green that we get in our heading image. We should figure out how to save this, because that's neat. Okay, the next thing, really the last thing that we didn't tackle yesterday was, okay, we gotta build a form down here. Let's maybe design a really pretty form so that it looks nice. So maybe what we would want to do down here is, instead of a form that looks like this, the best way to reach me is this. We maybe want to put this in a grid, or perhaps its own flex box. Let's try a couple different ways. So the first thing we'll do is let's just wrap this in a thing, so we can say if class equals form area, right? So that we can style what this form is going to look like. Right? So we probably want to have this form not take up this full area. So we're going to say, where are we at here? Yep. So we'll do dot form area, and we'll say background color. Let's just make it CCC for a minute, right? So we've given ourselves a little gray area, okay? And then let's say width is 50%. Cool. All right, that's too little. Let's not play with width yet. Okay, but what we want to do is this will probably be easier to do if we add all of the elements we're going to want to put in there, right? So we've got an input, okay, but we probably need a label for this. So let's put label 4 equals name, but we need an ID on this, so we'll put name. Okay. And we'll come in here and say this is name. Okay. Yeah, so we got, I don't like that, it looks ugly. Maybe what we do is we come into the label, and we say label, display block. So instead of being an inline element, now it's a block element. It goes above it. Okay, that's interesting. Still not crazy about that, but maybe what we'll do is we'll put the label at the end. Right, so each element, rather than being like that, we'll change it from block to inline again. Right, it's default behavior. Okay, name. All right. Well, that's all right. Let's go there. The first thing that jumps to mind is we probably want to have some padding in here. So what we've been using is padding everywhere else. We've been putting in actual pixels. 0.5 rem. Let's do this. So instead of 0.5 rem, we're just going to do that. All right, cool. So now we've got a little gray form area. We've given it padding that will, because we're using rem, that is tied to the base font size, right? So 16px. So this is 8 pixels of padding. If this was 32 pixels, right, everything would be huge. Oh, geez. But now you've got 16 pixels of this is half of it, right? Okay, so we've got ourselves a form area. We've added some padding. All right, let's add some more input elements. I'm not crazy about the label yet, but we probably want to put in a input type equals text, ID equals. Actually, let's make this input type equals email, right? Because we need to know who we're talking to. So we'll say email name equals email placeholder equals you at whatever.com. Right? We'll give it a little cutesy thing, and then we'll put in another label. And we'll say label for email address. Okay. So now we've got, okay, but I'm seeing that we have a problem here, and that problem is we don't have any, because BRs are inline, right? It's probably not even enough, right? So let's add another one. Now, we're probably going to want to not make this be physical line breaks, and we're probably going to want to control this with CSS, but for the purposes of just getting content onto the page, I'll often use a line break and be like, is this the form structure that I want, right? Next thing I probably want is, I probably don't want to even include a subject. I just want to give them a text area where they can put in some stuff. So maybe I'll just say label for equals message. And we'll say your message. Label. And then I'm gonna want a line break here for sure, right? So that my text area is on its own section, right? And we're gonna come in here and say text area name equals message, ID equals message, and we're not gonna put anything there, right? So text area. Now there's a couple ways we can do. Remember we learned that there's a rows attribute and a calls attribute. I probably want to actually define this in. I probably want to come in here and say, I want it to apply to all my inputs. So they're all the same height and width, maybe. But what I'm going to try first is I'm just going to say text area. I want the CSS to go, and I'm going to say width, 90%, right? So whatever size the container is, it's going to do 90% of that, and that's pretty good. Maybe I want to make this even more, 95%, right? And then height, maybe we want to make this, like 10 rem, right? So if our font size is 16 pixels, I want to do 160 pixels the height. That's probably too much. That's a pretty good size text area. Maybe we make this 5. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Right, so yeah, I like that. That's pretty good. But we definitely need, you can see your message is on a thing, right? We probably want to make this. We need more spacing in here. BR. Right? Great. Okay, so this is a form. This looks ugly, and I don't know what I would do necessarily to fix it, other than yeah, I don't think I love the labels on the right like that. Let's try them on the top. So that's how it is for our other thing, right? Move back. And let's put a line break, right? So this is now a pretty generic form. Yeah, that looks okay. It's still ugly, and we'll get to that in a minute. And then the last thing I need is input type equals submit. Value equals send me a message. Okay. Great, but we want line breaks here as well. Right. So now we know we got send me a message. I probably want to move this over to the right. So maybe what we do is we're going to come in here and we're going to say input type equals submit, and we're going to say float. Right. Let's just see what that does. It's going to float it, but we don't have an element under it that's keeping it clear, so we're going to probably just come in here and for the sake of just do span class equals clear. And if we come up here and we make ourselves a helper class of clear, right, just like TAC, we can do dot clear. I'll just say clear both. Does it need to be a div? Probably. Let's make this a div. So that it's a block level element. Right? Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So now we've got a form. It's gray. It exists in here. What would I do to style this so that it doesn't look like crap? Maybe what we want to do is just follow the theme we've been doing up above, right? We've got our little form area. Maybe we want to come into this. Where do we have our box shadow? Let's try the box shadow first. Form area. And we'll just come in here and say, give me, yeah, okay, that looks pretty cool. But maybe because this is a bigger box, we want to make it a bigger shadow so that it's more exposed. Maybe we do 10px, 10px. That looks pretty good, but maybe this needs to be 20 so it's more diffused. Alright, I can dig it. Maybe we want to even, yeah, I like that. Alright, that's got some pizzazz. I might want to just fiddle with this color until it's something cool. Maybe we want to use the same color that we used for the background color up there, so maybe we'd want to do medium sea green. That's too much green on top of green. Do not like. Okay. But regardless of that, we have built a pretty successful thing. I think the last things I'd want to probably spend some time tweaking and fiddling is I'm still not crazy about this style, and I think I'm not super crazy about the menu. I probably would want to go back to the sticky menu that I had before, which was here. So where were we? We have that defined. Did I take it out completely? That's unfortunate. Yeah, so let me just come in here and do sticky. Where was that? Position sticky. Now, what was it? Fixed? See, I have to go look it up. What is CSS position property? Absolute static fixed. That's sticky. We probably need to have it. We need to add like a top. Right? Give it a value first. Yeah, there we go. That was what was missing. So that's pretty cool. I'm not crazy about the link color. I think we probably can do something better here. Let's just make this white. That's already better. And then we probably would want to change the opacity a bit. Maybe make this like 0.7. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. And then I'd want to probably change the font to maybe something like this. Just come here and say, hey, everything in there is, you know, maybe want to take out the underlines as well. So I'd go font, style, text, decoration. Right. That can work. Why is it underlined? Oh, because it's up here maybe? Text, decoration. Yeah, there we go. So we take out those. I'm still not crazy about the opacity here, right? That's pretty good. But maybe, right? We've got this cool teal green here. What might look awesome is if we use that here. So, what color is medium sea green? Medium sea green. And then, what color is that here in RGB? 60, 179, 113. So we can do, copy that. What was it? 6179. 13. Right, so we can go RGB 60, 179, 13, and then we want to do like 0.8. RGBA. So now we're going to have a green menu item. Oh, got our semicolon. Not crazy about it. Maybe we need to make it a little darker. But we still want to like preserve the thematic idea of it being green. Yeah, that's cool. And that points out that maybe this needs to be green, right? We're using green in a bunch of places, so maybe that's the color that's missing here for our header. Right, so rather than using this color, we want to pick something kind of in this range. Right? Save. Oh, save the thing. Do it again. And then maybe what we're going to have for our text shadow is something that's like bright yellow, so it's still in the green spectrum. Not crazy about that. Let's make this 5, 5. I don't love it. Oh, stop clicking on that stupid box. So then you come up into, yeah, I don't love that. Back to white. Cool. So, of all the things that I'm still not happy with in this portfolio, it would be this thing right here. Just because I want to have a picture in the background, and maybe the problem is I have it so that it's a different picture every time. And so the font style that we have here is really clashing with what we're trying to do. So, I mean, if I made this 000.
So what about find a stable picture that you want to pick from?
Yep.
And have
That's what I might do.
and have a small animation. I found one last night. It's like a typewriter animation for CSS. If I could find it real quick, I'll post in the chat and see would that work.
Yeah. The other thing that I might do now that I've got, so we got this portfolio down here, right? These are supposed to be links that link to things, right? So let's maybe add some interactivity here. All right, look, we've got div class project. I probably want the entire thing to be clickable, right? So I might actually want to come in here and say ahref equals, and we want it to go to this, right? So we'll go GitHub, wait, CBC 12 instructor.github.io. And we're gonna, so everything here is clickable. What is that gonna do? Okay, first off, we got a problem in that it's gonna take the link style that we defined above. So what we need to do is we're going to fix that. Right? We had it up at the very top. So instead of just this being our default link style, we're gonna say it is our nav link style. So we'll come in here and say nav a. So any A that is inside our nav is that, but any A that is not is going to get nothing. So what we need to do is turn off styles for our links. So we say A, text decoration, none. We need to say color, 0 maybe. Yep, we're back. This is now a link. I can click it. It's going to take me to the actual page we were like on the live server. But maybe I want it to link to the GitHub repository instead. We'll think about it. But for sure, I want to add something cool so that when I hover my mouse over this, it does the expand. Does anyone remember what CSS property was letting us do that cool little hover effect? We talked about 3 that were like animation-y, but which one specifically would we want to use here if we wanted to add it on a hover? Does anyone remember?
from and to?
That would be if we wanted to animate it and have it do its thing. That was the keyframes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's close, but we want this to be interactive so that it only does its thing. It was one specific. We're going to have to add it into the project, and it was one of the transform. Right. And so if we say height, I'll leave out height for now. But transform, and I like the effect that we had when we were playing with this in W3 School, so I'm probably going to do something similar, which is transform. I'm going to say box shadow, and maybe like 1 second, maybe 2 seconds, just to see what it looks like. And so what we want to do is make this 10px, 10px, and maybe 20px. Right? So now when I hover, it gives us a bigger shadow, but we need to make it like a little bit bigger, right? So how would we make this a little bit bigger? We want to probably do height. Actually, let's just make it width. What is it right now? 150 roughly, so it's like 200. Let's make this 200px just to see what it does. And we'll do width 2s. Right. That doesn't do the behavior I want because the image isn't scaling with it as well. Okay, how about this? I got a better one. Rather than expanding the width, we're going to make it look cooler. Where did it go? There we go. So maybe we would do background color. Let's pick a nice light RGB. Let's pick like a nice light color. Like this. Alright. And we'll say background color. For a second. So when we hover, it's not yellow enough. Let's make this more yellow. Say, yeah, cool. So we made the shadow a little bit more pronounced, and but we probably even want to copy that color, right? So let's make the, let's see what happens if we make this, the shadow that we're casting, something like this as well. That's gross. Let's make it darker. Right? Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Maybe even darker. Maybe some kind of orange. Yeah, but I like that. That looks neat. So now each of these kind of has a little bit of pop to it when we're hovering over it. And this one's a link, so it's going to take you to the thing. But now I'm really pleased with the way this looks. The last thing that I don't love is this. And I think the solution that Gregory mentioned, we're just going to have to pick a picture so that it looks good on any background that we put it here, is probably the right answer. But I've got the start of a cool portfolio page. Right, the only thing I'm maybe not in love with is, like, I like it kind of like this. I might, I obviously don't have 5 projects in here, so let's take out one of them. So that like the default view of the page would be, 2 by 2, and as we increase our scale, right? If I'm on mobile phone, this looks neat. If I'm on another thing, it looks neat. Yeah. Did you have something, Gregory?
Just a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember how do you make that picture be like the first top page?
This one?
Like, yeah, how to like cover the whole first top page of the.
So let's look at that. So we have it defined up here. It's completely in CSS. We don't have it in our HTML anywhere. There's no image tag that is causing that. But what we did is if we look at our header, which is up here at the top, we set a height and we used a relative measurement. So we said this header is always going to be 90% of the page. We could have easily made this 80%, right? And then what we did was we said background image is a URL. We put in a link to a picture. This could have been a picture that we pulled from over here. Like I could have easily just said port images portfolio.png, right? Now it's that picture that we took as a screenshot. But I'm using this this URL that gives us a splash page. And then background size is cover, and background position is center. And so it's going to say whatever the entire dimensions of this element is, stretch the entire, like top, bottom, left, right, right? And then, but start from the center out, right? So that allows the image to kind of scale and shrink. You see it doing that behind the scenes as we adjust our image. There are a few other options that you could put here rather than cover. So let's do background size and play with a few of those options. Background size. So auto is one. That's the default, but it's going to keep it fixed, right? So even though as I'm making the thing wider, it's not trying to constrain the size so that the picture stays the same. And then the other option is contain. I don't know what this is going to do. Okay, so whatever the size of the picture is, it puts it in the middle, and then it also does cover behind the scenes, right? So like, oh wait, I grabbed. Oh, it's causing my browser to freak out, right? So it's going to duplicate it over and over and over again. But cover is a good one, right? If you're going to do a background image like this, cover I think is the best, right? Because no matter what size the page is on when I load it, it's going to kind of keep it at the right dimensions. Cool. Yeah, like every time it loads a blue picture, it makes all the rest of our website look terrible. So we're going to want to pick a picture for sure, 100%. Any other questions about that? We made ourselves a pretty nice little portfolio, and I would be proud of this. I would put this on my website today. I'd want to put in content about myself, and then when we learn JavaScript, I'm going to want to come in here and actually make this form do something so that it sends a message. Otherwise, it's broken, right? We can't submit it. And the other thing that we did yesterday that is probably not right? We relied on, we're doing the in-page linking that we do with the hashtags, but we didn't do it the correct way. We did it like a janky way that just so happens to work. We probably want to put anchor tags in here. So header, we probably want to actually change this to like a name, or ID equals header link, and then name equals header link. Right, an empty anchor tag so that it knows where to go. Anchor header link. Right. That is the correct way to do in-page linking. But the other way was working. It just sometimes might not work on other browsers. Cool. But I'm proud of this, and I would be happy to launch this myself. There's still little things I might tweak. But that's the kind of thing, like, we spent, what, an hour and a half on this total, and we have something that's, like, relatively okay looking. I might spend, if I'm trying to get a job, I might go through here and update this, add more information about me that is specific to the jobs I'm going for. So I might put in stuff like entry-level full-stack developer. I might want to make an extra section down here with credentials. So those of you that are in college right now, you might want to put, I'm getting a degree in X, Y, and Z. You might want to put like a little resume blurb up here about your education credentials. As you graduate this program, you might want to say like CBC 12 graduate, right? There's all kinds of things that I can think of to put on a page like this, besides just projects to look at, that I think I would still use this same kind of structure and just say, I'm going to add another section. I'm going to put it where I think it needs to go. And like, as you saw on my actual website, like I have this silly thing just because I thought it was interesting. I was kind of like talking about, these are the technologies I'm really comfortable using, right? I use Docker, but I'm not like a Docker expert. And it's just like a silly conversation starter. Like there's no right or wrong answer of what you could put on your portfolio. It just is about expressing yourself and saying, this is me, this is my website, this belongs to me, and here's what you need to know. I probably would want to come up here and add a link to my resume, right? So that if I'm trying to get a job, someone can download the resume, and maybe, you'd want it to be in PDF format or Word doc format or something. And I'd probably put that up here as well, right? So I'd come in here and say, ahref equals, resume dot PDF. Resume.
What about certifications?
Yeah, if you have any certifications, that would be great to put on here. Like I would put a section and I'd just put a logo of each certification I have: A+, Network Plus, Cisco certified, CCNA, whatever you got. That I think would be a great thing to put on here, especially for some types of positions. If you're going for anything in like network administration or any of these types of jobs, those certifications are worth a ton of value to employers. You know, another thing I might, and this is what I have embedded on my website, but I can go and say embed Twitter timeline, right? Feed. Yeah, and so they're going to tell you exactly what to do. Let's see. I'll just add in my Twitter feed, right? And so poster. How would I embed timeline? Oh, there we go. So I can copy this code wherever I want it to go on my page. So maybe what I want to do is put it down here in my contact area, right? So I maybe want to just come in here and say give ID equals Twitter, and just paste this little code that Twitter has given me. And now if I reload this page, now I've got my Twitter timeline in here, right? Like, it looks bad. I'd probably want to come in here and style this and say, down here in my content, I would maybe say Twitter width 200 px, right? Just to shrink it up even more than 50. And then maybe I'd want to put this in a grid so that it's directly to the left or right of my form. Or maybe I want to put it in, you know, I'm sure they've got some other options in here where you can choose how you want it laid out, right? Like maybe just want a follow button or something. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of options here, right? So anything that you can do on a website, I'd start to think of it in terms of like, how can I make my portfolio page the most useful way to contact me? I'm gonna take out this Twitter thing because it bothered me. Because like I've said a bunch of times, there's no right or wrong answer here. This is you. This is your page. So, you know, if you're into like the one software engineer I mentioned that we hired just because his portfolio was like entirely themed about fishing because his big hobby was fishing, and so he had like a cutesy little animated fish up at the top that was flopping around using CSS animations, and then he had a portfolio kind of like this. And, you know, he talked about all the things he's been working on. His passion for software development came through in his portfolio. He took a little bit of time making it look excellent. For someone like me, where, you know, the things I'm most proud of is like, I wrote a robot book. I'm an entrepreneur. I've started companies. I'm gonna highlight those things. Like the projects I've worked on, I don't really work on projects anymore. I'm gonna build a business, and the business is either gonna succeed or fail. Or, you know, I think the last time I worked on a small project was like 10 years ago when I made a PHP framework. So, but, you know, from the perspective of you guys starting out, you know, a lot of those projects and portfolios is going to be all you're going to have to show off in the first and second and third jobs you go and get. Is some of the things that you work on in this class. You know, I would encourage you for, you know, at least the first 10 years of your software development journey is that, like, you guys are going to have a superpower now that nobody else has. So start to use your skills to scratch your own niches. Like, so if Andrew's into fitness, like, build a fitness tracker for real. Like, actually do it. You know, I can't think of any other examples, but yeah, like whatever you're passionate about, build a little thing that shows that off. And you can spend just as much time as we've done in this class. Like, you can build something that looks okay in like an hour, and then when you learn the programming side, if you spend 4 hours making it like do something, it doesn't have to be, you know, every project doesn't have to be a full featured, like, you log in and here's a database with user credentials and I got to worry about password forms. You could just build stuff that is cool to look at, like tools that help you, like that CSS gradient thing that we were looking at the other day, gradient project, right? CSSgradient.io. This probably started out as somebody's little passion project where they're like, I forgot all the stupid gradient things, and so they spent a little time building these little widgets, and it generates like a CSS code for you. Like, build a tool that helps you be more efficient. Like, if you want to work with animations, build a thing that gives you the it generates those keyframe things for you. Like, projects don't have to be grand. You don't have to have all kinds of crazy stuff, but start to put yourself out there as you're doing this on things you care about, and use it as a way to experiment. Cool. All right, it is 7:30. I think it's time for one last break. Let's come back at 7:50, and we will go over some of this stuff and maybe build a new project together using grids. Cool. All right, welcome back. Everybody should be able to see my screen. Okay, what the last thing we played with was our portfolio here, but let's maybe build something together. Or is there something anyone would like to spend more time on? Like I think it's useful to build stuff because that's how I work. But if anyone would like to do something else, we can do that too. Any project ideas, or do you want to work on the activity tracker again? We can add some of the cutesy things, like instead of trying to smush grids in there, we can just start from scratch and build something as if it was a brand new project. We can add some of our cutesy little, like, I thought the heart animation thing was a pretty cool idea. What do we want to do? And bear in mind, like, all this is recorded, so you can rewatch this content in the future, right? What would we want to play with? Activity tracker. Is there any votes for anything else? Do we want to keep adding content to our portfolios and just think of some more sections we might want to add?
One idea I thought it was maybe like a weather app. Might be able to use some of the grid type stuff or Flexbox to position things. That's just one idea, unless anybody has anything else.
It's an excellent idea. I think it's a good one. Does everyone want to build a weather app real quick? And I think the weather app is another great example of something, when we start learning JavaScript a little bit later, we can take that weather app and make it actually do stuff using APIs, right? So like, we can go to like weatherchannel.com, they have an API, and we can like do queries to get like, what is my local weather? So that's a fun one. Let's build that as a project. All right, so just like before, we're gonna start a brand new project. Let's do open folder, and I'm gonna make a new thing here. I'm gonna call it weather. Well, I had a cool idea for a project earlier too, but I forgot. I need to try and remember what I thought of. All right, we're building a new weather app. Okay. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make a file. Well, let's start off with our structure. So we know we're gonna want images. We know we're gonna want CSS, and in the future we're probably gonna have some JavaScript in here, right? We know we're going to want a .getignore file, right? Because we are gonna work as a team on this at some point, and we want to make sure that Estrella and Andrew's DS store folders does not follow us around. Okay. And then I know I'm probably going to want to readme.md, and I'm going to say super awesome weather app. Right? Cool. All right, I've got the structure of what could be a very cool little web page, and then we're going to make maybe index.html. Okay, and I'm going to just give myself a little template with exclamation point tab. Right, so we're all caught up. We've got like an outline of a project here. None of this is version controlled because this is not a library. And so we've got a couple of different ways we can go about this. We can either pull up git bash and we can run into our folder, go to weather, and say git init, and then we're going to say git add dot git commit dash m initial entry. Okay. So I've added all three of those files that are in there. As we learned before, none of these folders are tracked yet because they don't have a file in them. As soon as we add a CSS file, as soon as we add a JavaScript file, as soon as we add anything in an image, those folders will start to exist as well. Now that I've got this stub set up, kind of my next step always is to go to GitHub. I'm going to want to create this repository so that I can store my code upstream. And I'm coming here and I'm say weather. Okay. I'll make it public. I don't need any of these because I already have them. I'm going to create a repository. And because I already have an existing repository, I'm just going to copy this information right here, and everything will be synced up. So I paste that. Right? It's doing git remote add origin with the address of GitHub, git branch -m main so that we set our main branch, and then git push origin main. So everything is, GitHub exists now. If I reload this page, we'll see our README. Super awesome weather app. Cool. There's an index page in here with nothing in it because it's blank. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do, let's give it a title. We'll say cool weather. What do we want to give our product name? Let's be like dark skies or something. I don't know. Is that already a weather app? Probably. Let's call this.
I think a quirky one would be funny.
Yeah, let's pick a quirky one. Throw out an idea.
Like a punny one related to weather.
Okay, like
Drizzle.
drizzle. That sounds like something. Right? But let's give it like a fancy Web 2.0. So it's gonna be like drizzle. DRZZL, right? That's kind of silly. And if we think of something better, we can change our product name in the future, right? All right, we definitely know we're going to need some CSS, so let's just add that in here now. Link rel equals style sheet, href equals CSS. We'll call this drizzle CSS. Right, cool. And we'll, just for the sake of argument, we'll say media equals all. Right, this is going to be our main style sheet for everything. All right, next, let's start laying out the structure of our website so that how do we want this to look visually? What, we thinking like up at the top is a header or like a logo. Maybe there's a like a text input area that lets us specify what location we want to look at when we actually start building this to do things. And then we're going to have some weather information, maybe like a forecast. So it'll be like the next 5 days. And we probably want to put in like a radar tracker or something like that, right? So we can see cloud cover.
Maybe like the current day's weather at the top. So when you first open it up, you get to see today.
That's a cool idea. Maybe we go a different route, right? I like this idea. So what I've been thinking in my head was kind of something like weather.com, where we've got, it says the weather, and then you put in your address, 3024, and you pick your town, because I'm thinking like this is the default behavior, and you want to see like these big cards of what the weather is. But maybe we want to go a different route altogether, and what I was thinking of is like we have a full page thing that just says like this is your current weather, and then maybe it's like got a really beautiful background that is tied to the weather. So if it's like rainy out, it's got like storm clouds as the background image.
You got a cow.
Yeah. If there's a tornado coming, you got a twister going. So maybe like, kind of what I'm thinking of is we got this card here that says the Thompson, Georgia weather as of 79 degrees, right? Maybe we think of this as like, we make this the full width of the page.
Kind of how you did your name on your portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
You had your name in the middle, and then you had the picture behind it. And we can do that with the weather. Like, this is the weather, and then this is what it looks like behind us.
Yeah, I like this. This is a cool idea. All right, let's start prototyping that with that in mind. I was gonna hopefully use grids for this, but yeah, let's not do that because we want to use grids. We want to like lay out our web page as if it was like a product. So let's start. Well, maybe we still do it both, right? Maybe that's part of the header, right? Like whatever your current, like this card is at the top of the page always. So let's do that. Let's do div ID equals main. All right, this is going to be our primary container. Boom. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to say, hey, the first thing is a header. Right. And let's make sure we just give ourselves cost like content box, right? Just so we know that these are going to be a part of our flex grid, or a part of our grid, so that we know that we can style them. We're going to probably want this for like border purposes. Then we're probably going to do, we might need a navigation, right? So we'll do nav class equals content box nav. Right? We probably need body. Oh wait, we already have body. Let's do section class equals content box. And maybe we want to give this one an ID that's like weather info, right? And then we definitely are going to want a footer, right? So footer, and that one needs the class too. Class equals content box footer. All right. So we've got, I think, the makings. Like we know our header is going to go full width. Then we got a navigation element on the left and a thing on the right. Maybe we want to swap it around. Maybe like the content we want to be on the. Let's try that. That sounds interesting. So let's say that the main stuff is over here, and if we have any navigation, it'll go over here on the right. Or maybe navigation goes inside the header. I don't know. We'll have to think about this. Like, oftentimes, if I'm building a product, like the exact thing we're doing right now, where we're typing all this out and thinking through it as we go, like you can prototype very easily inside of a web page. Also, alternatively, I might come in here and just pull up like Paint, right? And maybe come through here and just like sketch out some ideas. And Generally, when I'm sketching this out, I'm not going to use paint, but I'm going to use actual pen and paper because it's easier for me. But you know, we might think of things like this. I'm going to say, you know, logo, right? So logo, and then we definitely are going to want like a input box here for location. And then the question is, do we want a menu over here on the left, or do we want it over here on the right? And then what are we going to put in here? Because I really love the idea of making the current weather like big and bold and up in your face. You know, maybe that's even like this entire middle section here is current weather, and then we start building cards below it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe the top sections, like you're describing with the background, in conjunction with the actual weather when it communicates with the API. And then maybe below that, cards that have the extended forecast, like the next few days.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's try that. So maybe we won't use grids to lay out the top part, but we'll use grids to lay out the bottom part. So we want to start off not in a grid. That's an interesting idea. Oh, I'm on the wrong file. So rather than doing this, let's just take this out. And let's say the header is going to be on its own. And then we're going to have maybe a section that is, we're going to take out content box because we don't want this to be a part of our grids in the future. But we'll say, hey, we got a header, we got a section weather info that is right below the header. Then we probably need some kind of menu. And maybe these are stacked together. Maybe the menu is a horizontal menu like this that takes you to those cards where the information is. So that's a cool idea too. Okay, and then maybe we have, we have just a div in here, and we don't know what's going to go in here yet, so we're just going to kind of leave this as a placeholder, and we'll say something like H2 content cards, right? Because I think that's a cool idea. Let's play with that. And then up here, we know we're probably going to have navigation elements, so I'll probably just put in an unordered list that we can start playing with. So we'll say like menu 1, right? And we'll just copy that a few times so that when we're viewing our page on the live thing, we will have something to play with. Because maybe these two elements need to be inside the header. Right? Like this. And so if we come into, let's go to our thing, let's pull this up, open with live server. Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. So we've got kind of a structure here. We don't have our CSS file. Let's create that now so we can start just putting some styles on things so we can play with it. Okay. So new file, what do we call it? Drizzle.css. At first, we know we want to, let's just do HTML and body. And let's say font size 16 pixels. So we're setting a base font so we can start using responsive elements later on. We know we want to go, let's margin 0, padding 0. We know we want to have H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. We want to have margin 0, padding 0. And then I hate Times New Roman. It makes me want to puke, but I don't know what our font is going to be yet. So we're just going to say font family, Arial Helvetica, right? We'll give ourselves a nice, pleasant font. Okay, much better. Then we know we probably don't want UL. Let's do list style type none. Yeah, perfect. And we'll say margin padding 0. Padding 0. Right, so everything is just kind of unstyled at this point, and we're happy with this. Okay? So we know we have a header. Inside of it, it's got a weather info panel, and we want to have a nav under it. We probably need a logo as well, right? So we'll probably want to come in here and say like image. Let's actually put it as H2 or H1, right? This is our page title. Go ahead, Leah.
I have one question. So how come you have to specify margin 0 in the H1 and the UL when you already specified it in the like HTML and body one?
Because that's only going to operate on the HTML and bodies, right? So if let's add an H2 for example, H1. Let's see like hi, right? If I come in here, let's just for the sake of let's just border 1px solid green. Right? We're gonna add a border around this. If I take this out, right, you can see that there is padding around our H1. If I put this in, the padding disappears, right? So this is like flush, okay? But this margin of padding is on HTML and body elements, not on the entirety of all the elements, right? So when we put this in here, the body element by default has a little bit of padding so that all the content goes inside of it. If we wanted to make it so that, I mean, we could come in here, and this is going to be a pain in the butt, right? We could say on every element, give me margin 0, padding 0. But I often find that like paragraph tags, I'm comfortable with the default padding in there. You know, if there's, you know, with the except, I mean, I might even come through here later on if I'm going to actually use list elements. I might take this off and just say, you know, the only UL that I don't want to have this decoration is the menu one, right? I would come in here and say nav UL, right? So that every other LI on our page will get the default dots and ones and stuff. But when I'm working, and this is just my method, and there's no right or wrong way, is like when I'm going, I'm just kind of in the moment, in the heat of the moment when it comes out, I'm saying like I want that to be gone for now until I decide to put something in. But I don't want to do it on everything because I do like, you know, if I put a paragraph tag in here, so instead of put like lorem 200, right? Alt Z, so I get word wrapping. Oh, that's awful. Takes up so much space. I like that there's padding in here. Did you see where? Anyway, cool. All right. So we're all caught up. I'm going to take out well, I'll just leave that in there for now. Let's take out some of this crap. I don't want it to be taking up all this space. All right. Great. All right, so we got our header, right? So instead of picking an image, we're going to play around with text. So we're calling our cool website Drizzle, right? And we're going to do something cutesy with this this information. But I probably, let's see. Do I want this to be all in one line? I know that the thing I care the most about is probably this weather info box, because we're saying, hey, this is where we're going to have stuff like it's 79 degrees. What is the degrees symbol? I can press Alt 0176. Alt 0176. Right. 79 degrees. If we come to our website, yeah, so we can see 79 degrees in here. But I probably want this to be like super big and important. So inside of our section, weather info, I'm probably going to actually wrap this in an H2. This is important enough to me that this is probably like the second most important thing on the page. 79 degrees. Great. It's there. It works. But I know that section weather info, what do we call it? Weather info. I'm going to say weather card. I might come in here and say weather info. Let's say background color. Dark olive green. Just to give us a color that we know what we're working with. Great. Okay, I want this to be a card. I probably want this to be a grid, right? I would think. Maybe at least these top two, or maybe I just want it to be flexbox. I'm not sure yet. But I know that I want this to kind of operate like a card. So let's maybe just force it for now, and then decide what we want to do later when we actually start thinking about like what would this look like on a mobile experience. Then we start off and we say width 50%. Okay, that's pretty good. And then maybe we're going to float it to the left, so it will always crush up against the. Okay, and we probably want to have the same one for the logo, right? So we'll say H1. What is that? It's in our header. So we'll say header H1. We're going to float that to the left too, right? So float left. And I know that, like I told you, hey, the floating method is the old way, but it's still a really good way to, like, before you start to figure out what you're doing, it's just a really good way to quickly smush things together, and then we can actually decide what we want to turn it to. And then the next problem is, you can see now our menu is floating to the left as well. It's squishing up against this content. We probably want to come in here and say, you know, the nav is going to be a clear both. Right. Cool. So that's pretty much what we want, right? That's kind of right. We also know that we want this to be a card, so we probably want to do a fixed height on this. So let's maybe say, let's make it like 10 rem, right? So the font size, yeah, cool. Awesome. And maybe that's too big. I don't know. Maybe we'll make it 5. And now I'm not crazy about that green, but that's also fine. All right, we've got a menu here. Let's make our menu. Want to make it float left, or do we want to make it flexbox? So we did it on the other website. Let's make it. Let's do nav li, and we'll just for the time being float left. Okay. Cool. So all our menu items are there, and maybe we do text line justify. Let's see what that does. Okay, cool. All right, that doesn't work at all. Let's take that out. All right, but then we need content cards, which is our next section. So we're going to do class equals clear. Right. I'm going to come in here and make a clear class, so I don't have to use clear both all over the place. So we'll come up here and give ourselves a nice little helper class. Say dot clear both. All right. So yeah, we're starting to get like a top to bottom structure. Now I like having the logo taking up a tiny little bit of space over here, but I'm not crazy about this being smushed up against it. So maybe we do want to use grid for this top container. So let's try that, because I want it to have, we want to use some of that cool, maybe I want to use flexbox for this because it's just one row. Yeah, I do, right? Because flexbox is good for one direction, and grid is for when I'm trying to do multiple directions. Let's just do the one, and that's what we'll do, right? So we've got drizzle section menu. The problem is, if we got this, that's fine. Maybe the navigation should not belong to the header anyway. So we're going to take that out. So, cool. We're going to make this go back to the previous line. Awesome. And this is heading, not head. Cool. All right. So we're going to go in here and we're going to say header, and we're going to say this is display flex. Okay. So now those are flexed. But we also need to, just so we're sure on what the correct things are, let's just look up CSS flex. Cool. This is perfect. All right, let's just use this example. And we will say display flex, great. So those are already flexed. Cool. Let's use flex wrap, no wrap. We need to use some of the other, what were some of the other properties that we learned about? All right. CSS flexbox. So we want to do flex grow. Cool. All right, so we've refreshed ourselves in some of the things that we can do here. All of these are flex items already. So we want to do maybe margin. Let's actually steal from ourselves, right? We've already done quite a bit of work. Let's pull up our other file. Let's see how we did our project in our. Oh, that's the weight tracker. So let's open a new window. New window. And let's pull it out of our existing. So the projects card, I think, is a really good. We spent a lot of time working on that. That's to me a good. So we got a container with projects in it. So let's go in here and just steal this CSS container. Okay, display. So that's some of the stuff. We need flex direction, flex row. So we're just going to come in here and copy all that. Right here. We want flex direction, row, justify content, spaced evenly, flex wrap, align content, space around, and then align items this line. Right? Those are pretty good. Take this out now. And then what did we have in our project? We had margin left, margin top. So we're going to do the same thing here. So inside of our two elements, we probably want to come in here, and because we've got this in here, these are flexy, we want to give these a class. So we'll say class equals flex item. Then we want to come here and say class flex item, right? And the reason we're adding a class here instead of, I mean, we could have gone through here and just said, you know, H1 and what was the other thing? Section weather, and defined the same CSS rules on both. But I find it usually is cleaner just to like read to add a thing on it. So we do flex items, and we'll say what is another style we liked in here? We wanted the margin top, the margin left. So we'll say margin top 1 margin. And then, did we want to take our padding? Yes, we probably do. So we'll do padding dot 5 then. Okay. So now if we view our page, right, we've got a flex container. Now I'm not crazy. All right, we probably want to not do space evenly. We probably don't want to do this. So let's do let's see some of our other options in justify content. Let's do left. Okay, and then we probably need margin right. Did we name this correctly? Flex item, not flex items. Perfect. So we probably don't want margin top. Let's take this out because that's putting extra spacing. We want this to be at the very top of our page. And then we do like that it has some stuff to the right. So that's good. Let's take out all these borders in here. It's driving us crazy now. Okay. Save. Great. So that is the makings of a good looking thing. But maybe what I want to do is, because we know that we're going to have a whole bunch of cards down here, I really want to focus on, like, let's make one really good card first and focus on that. So what I might do is let's just focus on this, right? So I might want to say border radius, let's just say 25 px. All right, so I've given us, that's too much rounding. Let's do 10, see if that looks any better. Yeah, so that's a light rounding. I like that. All right. Green, not crazy about it. Do we want to put a picture behind this image, right? That was one of the things we were talking about. Or maybe we want to have it behind something else. Or maybe we want to have this not be a card at all. This is like a part of the heading. So that rather than doing this, right, maybe we do instead this. And we put it as a part of the heading. So we come in here and say header. And maybe what we do in the header is we say background image. And then let's just do URL. And splash. Yeah. Let's do 224 by 768. Okay, and then we do background. I always forget these. Background size, cover, background position. So let's just copy this. And if we were, because we had the idea that I loved, which was whatever the weather is, like let's put an image back there that displays it, like it would be cows if there's a twister. What do we think? Do we want this primary weather box to? One thing we can do is we can set height, and we'll say something like 30 view height. Right, so it's going to be that's not enough. Let's make this 60 view height. Right, so we always have this on the page, and maybe what we want to do is align items baseline. Let's put the align content. So instead of baseline, let's do align items. Yeah, baseline flex start, maybe. Yeah, and then align content. So space around. Flex start. Right, yeah, so now we're talking, right? So we've got our effects set, and what we can do is we can just to make sure we know what we're working with, border on PX solid yellow, right? So these are our two items. There's a little bit of padding in there, and it's hard to see, so let's make it color right? Put white. That's hard to see too. Stupid images in the background. Images are going to be the death of us. All right, that's cool. So we got our little drizzle logo. We probably want this to be positioned differently. What else would we want to put in this weather box? Current weather status, raining, something like that. What else? What does Weather Channel do? They put a time as of. They've got this little sun. Is this an image? Let's take a look. Oh, it's SVG. Cool. We haven't learned about that yet. So they've got like a little indicator letting you know if it's raining or cloudy. That's cool. And then there's like the forecast, right? So there's fair. So we probably need a H3 forecast. We'll just put fair. Right? We can copy some of their stuff.
The geolocation.
Oh, the address. Yeah, good one. So that was kind of at the top, right above this. It's probably not a heading on its own. So let's just for now put in like a let's put a strong in here and say Thompson. I live in Thompson, Georgia. Right? And when we learn JavaScript, we can make it. Okay, yeah, this is pretty good. I like this. And then we probably need to have like a that says like as of 1% chance of rain. Right, so we're gonna get all this content eventually from somewhere else. Oh, there's a cat nose. Do not like. Alright, cool. Alright, this makes me happy. We're on to something cool here. Now I probably want this 79 over here. Probably want this H2. Let's say weather info. Maybe we want this weather info H2. I want to do text align center. Right? Cool. Maybe I want this to be text align right. And maybe what we want to do is, because we know our base font size is 16px, we probably want to do something ridiculous with this one because it's supposed to be like the most important element on our thing. So we're probably going to do like 10 EM, right? Maybe something super huge. Oh, that's way too big. Yeah, maybe it's not way too big. It definitely jumps out, huh? Let's make this 5. So, yeah, that's pretty good. But now we've got a problem in that we have a flex box and some of our info is outside of it. How does that happen? Oh, because we floated this. Let's take out the floats. This is all broken now. Right? Float left. That one's fine. Did we have another thing floated? Shit. Oh, that looks nice. Okay. Why is this content outside of this box? Oh, because we have float here as well. I missed it. Save. No, it's still outside of it. That's weird. Let's look at our HTML here. We got section weather info class flex item. Flex item. Border margin. Did we set a height on this? No, that's on that. Oh, we set a height here. So this is our problem. So we take this out. Yeah, there we go. So the reason that our content was leaving this box, and that's one of the reasons why we put these little debugging borders in here, was because we said this box is this tall. And the content, when we made this huge, was like, well, there's more stuff that has to go outside of it. And so it was just displaying outside of that boundary. So that's just something to be aware of. Sometimes these properties can collide with each other and it ends up not working what we want. But this, I'm pretty happy with this structure. Does anyone have any ideas of things we maybe want to change in here? Maybe the location needs to be on the right as well. Maybe this needs to be centered. I don't know. I'll leave that maybe for things to tackle next. But then scrolling down this page, right, we got this menu. Right, we want to make this actually look like a menu. But first, what I'm probably going to do is commit all of our changes so we don't lose it. We'll say initial draft of weather heading. Right. Yes, we want to stage and commit. And a push. Alright, so all of our code is caught up to date. Okay, we've built a bunch of menus before, but I think we're probably going to do the same sort of thing here, which is I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to say the nav is, we can take out clear both now because we're not floating anything. Great. But we're going to say the background color is going to be, let's just put medium C, midnight blue first. Right? And if we, probably need to have this, because nav is footing left. Why is our nav not showing up as Moonlight Blue? Let's inspect it and take a look. I think what's happening is, that's background. It's just not, it doesn't have this information inside of it. So if we do display, block, right, have element, because we're floating this stuff, let's take out the float here. Right, so there we go. We got a midnight blue. Alright, ally. And we want to probably do like, let's make this flex box as well, right? Because we had a lot of success with that the other day. So yeah, again, great artist steal. So let's just steal our menu from our portfolio here. So this is our nav. Right? We can just take this and let's grab all of it because we already spent quite a bit of time designing this in the first place. So let's just go. Whoop. Let's just put a little comment in here so we know we're keeping our section separate. Navigation, main navigation. Okay. And so now we've got menu items that are in here. Right? These aren't links yet, but we're going to eventually take us to cards on down the page. And the cool thing is that this is, because these are all, we're treating the individual LIs as the flex items, we can add more of these, right? It's going to gracefully grow regardless of size, right? There's at some point it will overwhelm this page, right, when the content gets too much, and so we will have to decide what we're going to do with that in that case, but this is a good enough structure to start with, right? Okay, what are the contents we're going to want? We're going to want maybe this would be a great time to use actually, let's take this out. Let's say footer is there, right? Don't need a content box. But maybe we have a section class equals main, maybe ID main, right? Yeah, that's just a class main section, and then we'll want this to be. We'll leave ourselves a little HTML comment. We're going to say layout cards using grid. Right? We still might want to have a card look and feel where everything has like a nice rounded border. Maybe we put a little drop shadow on it, but we're going to place them so that we can have like big cards on the left, like forecast stuff, and then small cards on the right where it's like your 5-day glance or special weather alerts, right? That's another thing we probably need to have in here is the ability to say like, you're in Thompson, Georgia, we probably need to have some kind of bright red box that says like tornado alert, right? If we're trying to be a really nice weather app. Oh, I like that one. Go ahead, Gregory.
I'm making the weather box less transparent.
What was the question?
What about making the weather box less transparent?
Parent? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Make it opaque. Like you can still see the background, but more opaque.
So let's try that. That's a good suggestion. What do we have? It's the weather info card. So we can say background color, and then just for the sake of argument, we'll do RGBA, and we'll say 0, 0, 0. So that's full black, and we're just gonna say that's mostly transparent, right? So 4. Right? That looks pretty cool, right? Even with the ugly borders that we have in there for debugging. Here we have 7, right? Oh, that pops maybe, right? I think we're onto something pretty cool here. And maybe I want to do the same thing for our logo, so our logo definitely stands out too, right? Like this is an interesting design, so let's run with it and see where it takes us. So what do we?
We also could make the logo a little bit bigger.
We sure could. Like, this is important. This is our website, right? Maybe what we want to do is we want to put the logo inside this box so that like the whole go back to our original idea of like the most important thing on this page is the weather card at the very top. We make this bigger, so we instead of trying to make it flex around and worried about layout, we just say like welcome to drizzle right up here. We can have maybe like check this out. So.
Or change the font of the text, make it a little more
so instead
different.
Of this being flex item, this says drizzle like that. That's kind of cool. And then if we make that full screen, maybe. So instead of being width 50%, maybe we make this width 100% by default. Or let's do width 25%. Let's just see what this looks like. Okay, that's kind of cool. Maybe not as cool as the other one. let's think about that.
That look better though, but yeah.
Because we can always do margin 0 auto. Right? I think that will, put it in the middle of the page. So that's cool. And then maybe what we do want a width, and we say something like, we probably want to set it to be relative to our view height or our view width. So we'd say something like 90 view width, right? That's kind of neat.
Nice.
Yeah, we'll think about that. And then maybe what we want to do is we still want to make it curvy. I don't know. Maybe we come in here and we say border radius 10 px. Little corners about it. I don't know. And if we don't make this yellow, but we instead make this like white, or maybe what we do is we tie in the background color instead of it being just black or like that color. It's like if it's bright and stormy, it's yellow, right? Like we could do stuff like if it's a sunny day out, right? Like this can be yellow.
With that current background image, it kind of looks like a rear view mirror.
Yeah, a little bit. Go ahead, Gregory.
Is there a way? I just speculating right now. Is there a way is in CSS or JavaScript so that when you change the picture or the background, or say if it's a rainy day, you can make the background be rainy?
Yes. And if we continue building on this product, that's exactly the sort of interactivity that we probably would want to put in here. Like when we're talking about building things that are joyful and building things that are cool, like the difference between us and this weather app we're building and weather.com is weather.com is a bunch of, it's a corporation. They have like a very clean cut, trustworthy image. But maybe the product Drizzle, because we're trying to be cutesy, is, we want to have some interesting things on the page. Maybe if it's raining, right, we could play some audio in the background, which I would not recommend on any other type of website or product. But like maybe it's got like gentle rainstorms, and if it's a sunny day, maybe it's a little bird chirping, like a little maybe it's not playing all the time, but it's just like a little secret that pops up every once in a while, right? We can be as cool as we want to do, right?
Or we could make it like when you load the page, you want to know the weather, it'll make that sound.
Yep. We have all kinds of opportunities at our disposal here, and I think that we should think of this in terms of like let's be creative, right? Because CSS, I mean, if you can, I'm not a designer. Like somebody who's really good at art would probably just come in here and be like, I'm going to do exactly this with CSS. For me, this is my process. I'm going to just iterate until it looks good to me, and then move on. Okay, so we're on there. Maybe we want to have the menu this color. Right? We pick this green. But maybe the menu, if it's a sunny day, it's yellow. If it's a cloudy day, it's gray. If it's a rainy day, it's black. If it's winter, it becomes white. We can do all kinds of cool things like that based on the content that, when we're able to pull using JavaScript and we actually get weather data in real time, maybe that's being pulled from here. The other thing that jumps to mind is like we've got this box that's really nice, but now it no longer necessarily makes sense to have this be this big. So maybe what we do is instead of saying height is 60 view height, let's see what happens if we take this out. Yeah, okay. Cool. I might want to have a little bit of padding around it if we're going to continue to use this like background with opacity. Not sure.
I was going to say, what if you revert it back to the same, but you just center that? Like if you can have that equal.
What was the question?
I was saying, what if you just centered
this whole thing so that there's extra space
in the center?
Yeah, so we could probably do that in a couple of different ways. So justify content, flex wrap, align content. Let's try this line. See what that does. Nope. Try this line. Okay, the other way we might want to do this is we could do the same thing we did before, which is margin. Let's do like 5%. And then, wait, how did we do it here? Right, we did it with weather info. Width, 90, view height, okay, margin, 0. So we want to do the same thing, but backwards. Let's actually do this. Let's just do auto. Right? Ooh, no, that didn't work. Because we have this up here. So we want to take out, take this out. Perfect. There we go. Didn't do what we wanted. Did not put a... Okay, so I'm going to put margin auto. just say, let's just see if forcing this 50. Okay, cool. So that kind of worked. So let's just say 10%. And does this grow and expand with our page now? Oh no, that breaks things. So we'll probably have to figure that out next. Because why is this doing this? Because we've got a fixed height on this, right? Probably. Margin 10%, so we took this out. No, it's still overrunning it, so that's not the thing. It is a flex item. We've got a margin right of 1 rem. We've got padding of 5. We've got the border here, and we've got the color. So let's take these out. We probably want to leave the padding though. Let's take out this margin right. We got our height. We got flex wrap. We probably don't. I mean, the problem is we've got this built as a flex box now, but we don't really need it to be a flex box anymore. So let's just try taking all this out. We don't need this anymore. Right. Cool. Wait, what did I lost my. Let's take it out and see where we're at. Oh, because we have margin here, right? So we did 0. Perfect. So we're back to where we were. All right. We have weather info. This is our section. It's inside of our header. So header used to be a flex, but now it is not. Then we have a weather info. This is no longer a flex item, so let's take that out. Let's just call it weather info. So we need to put in padding. We need this to go in here. I'm going to take this out. Okay, we're getting close. Okay, so we want this weather info box that is inside this header that has a background image. We want to have a margin top. We probably have like a 10%. Now, why is it pushing that up? That doesn't make sense. Let's try margin top 20 px. Is that going to add? Yeah, it's adding white space. Why is it adding white space? Okay, I got it. What we have to do is go the opposite direction, right? So rather than doing this, we probably have to do padding inside of here. And so we'll do padding 10%. Let's just see what that does. Okay, cool. But then we have to take out our margin here. What does that do? Okay, we probably want to do padding 10%, 0, and then margin 0 auto. All right, cool. We're kind of where we want to be. This stretches, grows with our page. If we do this now, yeah, it works like we'd expect. Until we get to the, it's still going over this menu. So it's probably something that's broken in the menu. So we look at our menu, which is right here below our header. Do we have anything on our header that would cause content to go over? Maybe the background size, cover, position, hover. We got height set to that. So let's just see if we can. Oh, we got a flex box in there. All right. I think
Could it be because it's outside of the header?
it could, except it's not outside of the header anymore, right? So like. The behavior we think that should happen, right, is that like there should be like we have set a height of this header. We said the header is 60 view height, right? So whatever the view height is, that's going to be 60% of that, which is working correctly. Except the menu is following it up and down, right? We would expect that. That should be 60 view height regardless of the view height. It doesn't look like it's doing that. Oh, so this is probably... It's adding padding. So let's do this. Let's just see if we can fix this nav. Let's say, so we got margin, padding. This is display flex, but let's try and do something here that says, well, that's position sticky. We don't want that, right? So that's probably our problem. Right, because we inherited, yeah, there we go. So now because we had copied that CSS from our previous page, it was defined as sticky in a way that we did not want. But that's fine. It was easy to fix. All right, so we've got a menu. It's here. All right, what else do we need in our page? All right, so we've got a section main, and we want to lay out these cards in grids. So let's go to CS. Let's pull the grid from here because they have some really good simple examples. So we'll do CSS Grids. And we'll just take one of their little things here that will let us, let's just try these, right? So we can do grid container, grid item. So we're just going to copy in theirs so that we'll have something to look at visually. And we'll say main section. So we got grid container, grid item, good. These are all, I want to fix my alignment here so everything makes me look happy. When we come in here, we're going to say grid container, grid item. Alright, so if I put this in here, we should see a CSS grid that follows here, and make sure our alignment is good. Okay, save. If I come into our page now, we should see, yeah, we got boxes in here exactly like we'd expect. So we probably are going to want to do some kind of 2x1 or 1x2. Does anyone have strong opinions? I mean, the other thing we could do is we can just leave it up to the card itself. Maybe we do 2x1 by 2x1, and we can kind of wrap it around like a snake so that we'll have some kind of interesting pattern of bigger card on the left with a smaller card on the right, then a smaller card, and then a bigger card. That would be kind of cool. How can we do that with CSS? Yeah, so these are all putting in fixed values. We probably don't want that, but this at least, yeah, let's give it this auto. But I think that would be where we would start to focus on the cards themselves next, because we probably want to have whatever these menu items are is gonna take us to a specific card, and we probably want to make it so that we think through. We probably want to structure this as like 10-day forecast, radar, weather alerts, travel advisory, like whatever we think we need for our weather product. I would want to start thinking about where it's going to be placed so that it will help us decide how we're going to design these boxes. Okay, now it is 8:45. I think this is a really good stopping point. Tomorrow we're going to spend a little bit more time on this. We are going to play with. We're going to start talking about SEO and accessibility. And then that will be, this was a short week, so this is the end of our CSS HTML stuff before we start diving into JavaScript next week. I want to give us plenty of time tomorrow to continue playing with this if we want to. We can go over some stuff. We can just do a light review. But next week is really going to dive into programming, which I think is going to make things super interesting, because then we can start doing things like let's build the forms that it does stuff. Let's make it so that maybe we have submenus, right? Any questions? Anything you want to cover today? We got a hard stop at 9 o'clock tonight, but I'm happy to answer questions. Let me pause the recording.